Greetings, Lawmasters! Tonight our chronicle covers the tale of a warrior who stands as a beacon of unyielding virtue in a city determined to drown itself in corruption. We are heading deep into the autumnal forests of the Rift to sit by the fire with Mjoll the Lioness. We're going to unravel the trauma, the lost steel and the vengeance that defines her. This isn't just about a follower you pick up because she has good stats. It's about a woman who looked at the worst city in Skyrim and decided to plant her boots firmly in the mud and say, no further. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a trip to Cold Harbour without some serious enchanted gear, or at least a very generous supply of cheese wheels to pause eat in the middle of combat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment down below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how global our little guild of insomniacs has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in the Rift always smells faintly of wood smoke and decaying leaves. It is a sensory detail that the game engines of old couldn't quite convey to your nose, but the visuals did the heavy lifting for your imagination. The eternal autumn of the region paints the world in hues of burnt orange, russet and gold, creating a deceptive warmth that masks the biting chill of the wind coming off Lake Honric. It is here, amidst the creaking wooden walkways and the damp stone foundations of Riften, that we find a figure who seems entirely out of place. Most of Riften's inhabitants walk with a hunch, eyes darting to the shadows, wallets clutched tight against their chests. They are beaten down by the Blackbriar influence or the looming threat of the Thieves Guild operating quite literally beneath their feet. But not Mjoll. Mjoll stands tall. When you first encounter Mjoll the Lioness, usually wandering the marketplace near the forge or leaning against a railing overlooking the canal, the first thing that strikes you is her posture. She doesn't slouch. In a city of thieves, liars and downtrodden labourers, she occupies space with the confidence of an apex predator. She wears her heavy armour not just as protection, but as a statement. It's banded iron or steel, functional and scarred, lacking the ceremonial polish of a city guard but possessing the rugged reliability of gear that has seen the road. Her face is marked with war paint, broad strokes of teal or blue that frame her eyes, giving her gaze a piercing intensity. It's the face of a Nord who has seen the beauty of Tamriel and the ugly underbelly of its ruins, and has decided that neither will break her. Mjoll represents a very specific archetype in the lore of the Fourth Era, the weary but unbroken hero. Unlike the Dragonborn, who's a blank slate destiny child, or the Jarls who are bogged down in political manoeuvring, Mjoll is a citizen soldier. She has no official rank. She holds no title granted by a king or an emperor. She's simply a woman with a sword and a moral compass that points true north, regardless of the magnetic interference from the gold coins changing hands around her. She introduces herself as a protector, but her history suggests she is truly a wanderer at heart. Before she became the self-appointed guardian of Riften's marketplace, Mjoll was an adventurer of significant renown. This is a crucial distinction to make. In Skyrim, adventurer is often a title claimed by bandits in denial, or city guards who took the infamous arrow to the knee. But Mjoll is the real deal. She speaks of her travels with a mixture of nostalgia and weariness that only comes from actually sleeping on the cold ground for months on end. One of the core in-game facts that players quickly learn is that Mjoll is one of the few NPCs who openly defies the Thieves Guild and lives to tell about it. If you stand near her in the market long enough, you'll hear her loudly proclaiming her disdain for the guild, calling them thugs and filth, within earshot of Brynjolf and his associates. It's a bold, almost suicidal stance to take in a town owned by Maven Blackbriar. Yet, nobody touches her. The guards, who are mostly on the Blackbriar payroll, give her a wide berth. The thieves, who usually have no qualms about intimidation, seem to have collectively decided that Mjoll is simply too much trouble to assassinate. This speaks volumes about her reputation. Even the criminal element recognises that the Lioness isn't just a nickname, it's a warning label, but she's rarely alone. We have to address the elephant, or rather the Imperial, in the room. Trailing a few steps behind her, almost like a lost puppy or a dedicated squire, is Aerin. He is an Imperial citizen of Riften, soft-spoken, unarmoured, and utterly devoted to Mjoll. This dynamic is one of the strangest in the game and has fueled endless speculation within the community. Fan theories regarding Aerin and Mjoll range from the tragic to the deeply cynical. The most charitable interpretation is that Aerin is a noble soul who saw a hero in need, we'll get to that specific incident later, and dedicated his life to aiding her cause. He acts as her anchor to humanity, the civilian who reminds the warrior what she's fighting for. However, the darker, more cynical fan theory, and let's be honest, the one the internet loves to run with, is that Aerin is the ultimate simp of Skyrim. Players often joke about his obsessive behaviour. He follows her into your house if you marry her. He watches her sleep. He stands in the corner of the room while she eats. There is a persistent debate on the forums about whether Mjoll is oblivious to his affection, or if she's fully aware and keeps him around because she needs the emotional support, effectively friend-zoning him into oblivion. It adds a layer of awkward, human realism to her character. She is this legendary warrior, yet her daily life is tethered to this mundane, slightly clingy man who likely saved her life but now defines his entire existence by hers. It's a tragic codependency that plays out in the background while you're busy buying potions from the local alchemist. But let's strip away the current context of Riften for a moment and look back at the woman before the city. Mjoll's dialogue reveals a history that spans much of Tamriel. She mentions having adventured across the continent, not just within the borders of Skyrim. This implies a level of experience that dwarfs almost any other follower you can recruit. She has seen the deserts of Hammerfell and the ash wastes of Morrowind. In fact, there is an obscure lore tidbit hidden in her ambient dialogue that has puzzled loreheads for years. Mjoll will occasionally remark on her time in Morrowind, specifically mentioning cliff races. She says, "I've seen enough cliff races to last a lifetime." Now, for those of you who didn't play The Elder Scrolls The Through Morrowind, cliff races were these incredibly annoying flying pterodactyl-like creatures that swarmed the skies and made travel a nightmare. However, according to the lore established in Oblivion and Skyrim, St. Geob supposedly drove the cliff races to extinction years prior. So, why does Mjoll mention them? Is it a developer oversight? A simple nostalgia nod for the older fans? Or does it imply something about Mjoll's age or the truth of St. Geob's crusade? Perhaps the extinction wasn't as total as the Bard's College would have us believe. Maybe somewhere, in the deep ashlands where the Empire's census doesn't reach, the screech of the cliff racer still echoes, and Mjoll was there to hear it. It paints a picture of a woman who has walked where others fear to tread, facing monsters that are supposed to be myths or memories. This history of wandering is what shaped her physique and her mentality. You don't get the title the Lioness by sitting in a tavern. She earned it through blood and mileage. Imagine the life she led before the game starts. The constant maintenance of armour, checking leather straps for rot, sharpening blades by the light of a dying campfire while wolves howl in the distance, the solitude of the road. Skyrim is a beautiful province, but it is vast and empty. To wander it alone, as she did, requires a mental fortitude that most people simply do not possess. She tells stories of hunting distinct beasts, of tracking prey across rocky tundras. She wasn't a mercenary fighting for coin. She was an adventurer fighting for the thrill, for the challenge, and perhaps to make the world slightly safer. This is a key distinction in her character profile. Mercenaries like Brono or Janassa fight because it's a job. Mjoll fights because it is her nature. It is an intrinsic part of her soul. She seeks out the conflict because peace feels unnatural to her. Even in Riften, where she is technically settled down, she's restless. You can hear it in her voice. She paces the market like a caged animal. She talks about the corruption of the city not just with anger, but with frustration, as if she wants to simply draw her sword and cut the problem away, but knows that politics and crime syndicates cannot be solved with a steel edge alone. She's a warrior trapped in a cold war, a woman of action stuck in a stalemate. Her stature as a Nord is also significant. Nords are naturally resistant to the cold, a trait she likely relied on heavily during her travels. The game mechanics give Nords a 50% resistance to frost, which, from a lore perspective, means Mjoll could march through a blizzard in the Pale wearing nothing but her iron armour and feel only a mild chill, while an Imperial or Khajiit would be freezing to death. This biological advantage allowed her to explore the northern coastlines and the high peaks, places where the ancient ruins tend to hide. And it was this drive to explore, this addiction to the discovery of the ancient, that eventually led her to the obsession that would nearly cost her everything. She didn't just wander aimlessly, she hunted for history. She sought out the places that the locals avoided. She was drawn to the dark shapes on the horizon, the crumbling stone towers that signalled the entrance to a barrow or a fort. But as we will soon see, not all ruins are created equal. Some are filled with Draugr, the mindless dead who shuffle and groan. Others are filled with bandits, men and women desperate for gold. But there is a third kind of ruin in Skyrim, the kind that hums, the kind that smells of oil and steam and ozone, the kind that ticks and whirs in the dark, waiting for an intruder to break the silence. Mjoll's early days of wandering were filled with victories against flesh and blood, against the undead and the beasts of the wild. These victories built her confidence. They made her believe that she was invincible, that her sword arm was strong enough to overcome any obstacle Tamriel could throw at her. It's a dangerous thing, that kind of confidence. It blinds you to the precipice until your foot is already slipping over the edge. As the sun sets over the rift, casting long golden shadows across the water of Lake Honrich, Mjoll looks out from the docks. She isn't looking at the beauty of the lake. She's looking past it, toward the mountains in the distance. Her hand likely drifts to her hip, reaching for a weapon that isn't there anymore. A phantom limb of steel. She is the Lioness of Riften now, a guardian of the innocent. But beneath that layer of civic duty lies a warrior who is mourning a loss she can barely articulate. She's a survivor, yes, but survivors always leave a piece of themselves behind in the wreckage. To understand the Lioness, we have to strip away the stone walls of Riften and place her back where she truly belongs, under the open, sprawling canopy of the sky, before the politics, before the crusade against the Thieves Guild, and before the burden of a city's conscience rested on her shoulders. Mjoll was a creature of the road. Her life was defined by the rhythm of bootfalls on dirt paths, the smell of pine resin in the heat of the day, and the crackle of a solitary campfire keeping the darkness at bay. If you've spent any time wandering Skyrim yourself, you know that the road is a character in its own right. It changes moods. In the Pale, it is a treacherous ribbon of ice that threatens to snap your ankles with every step. In the Reach, it is a rocky, vertical nightmare patrolled by the Forsworn. But for Mjoll, the road was freedom. It was a simple transaction. She gave the land her sweat and her vigilance, and in return the land offered her glory. During these years, Mjoll was not just a warrior, she was a spectacle. Picture her striding down the road from Whiterun to Rorikstead. She wouldn't have been travelling light. We tend to forget, thanks to our convenient inventory menus that let us carry 300 cheese wheels and a spare set of Daedric armour in our back pockets, that adventuring is a logistical heavy lift. Mjoll would have been laden with a bedroll, rations, whetstones, oil for her armour, and perhaps a few trophies from her latest kill. Yet, by all accounts, she moved with an energy that suggested the weight was nothing more than a feather cloak. Central to this image of the wandering hero was her weapon. Before the tragedy we are slowly approaching, Mjoll wielded a blade that was as famous as she was. It was a weapon that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 prisms of teal and green. She called it Grimsever. Now, here is a core in-game fact that every player eventually uncovers. Grimsever was a glass greatsword. In the world of the Elder Scrolls, glass is a bit of a misnomer that often confuses new arrivals to Tamriel. We aren't talking about the fragile material of your kitchen windows. We're talking about refined malachite, a volcanic crystal that, when properly treated by a master smith, becomes harder than steel and sharper than obsidian. A glass greatsword is a statement piece. It says you are either incredibly wealthy, incredibly lucky, or incredibly dangerous. For Mjoll, it was the latter. The sight of a Nord woman, tall and imposing, swinging a massive blade that looked like it was carved from a frozen emerald, must have been terrifying to the average bandit. Grimsever wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of her will. The balance of a glass weapon is different from steel. It is lighter, faster. It allows for a style of combat that is less about bludgeoning and more about flowing lethal arcs. Mjoll didn't just hack at her enemies, she danced with them, a deadly waltz where she always led, and they always fell. Her proficiency with this weapon, and her choice of lifestyle stems from an upbringing that we only get glimpses of in her rare moments of vulnerability. This brings us to our obscure lore tidbit for the night. If you listen closely to Mjoll's ambient dialogue when she is feeling chatty, she mentions her father. She tells us that her father was a hunter, a man of the woods who knew the behaviour of beasts. He raised her to follow in his footsteps, teaching her to track, to move silently, and to respect the prey. But Mjoll says, quite poignantly, "My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I had a different calling." This small line recontextualizes her entire character. She wasn't a soldier conscripted into a legion. She wasn't a guard earning a wage. She was a hunter who grew bored of deer and elk. She craved game that fought back. She took the skills of a survivalist, patience, observation, environmental awareness, and applied them to monster hunting. This explains why she survived so long alone. A soldier knows how to fight in a formation. A hunter knows how to survive when the formation breaks. Mjoll knew which berries would kill you, which caves smelled like troll fat, and how to tell if a dragon had passed overhead recently by the scorching on the treetops. Her different calling took her all over Tamriel. She speaks of the deserts of Hammerfell and the rocky coasts of High Rock. She was a tourist of danger. There is a romanticism to this era of her life. Imagine the nights spent under the auroras of the north, cleaning the green blade of Grimsever by the firelight, feeling entirely self-sufficient. There were no jarls telling her what to do, no maven Blackbriar whispering threats, just the wind and the steel. However, this life of constant combat has led to a fascinating meta-discussion among the fanbase. Let's touch on a community debate that surrounds Mjoll. In the game code, Mjoll is flagged as an essential NPC. This means that, unlike most followers who can die if they take a giant's club to the face or if you accidentally hit them with a fireball, we've all been there, don't deny it, Mjoll simply takes a knee. She pants, recovers her health, and gets back up. She's literally unkillable by game mechanics. The community has spent years debating the Watsonian reason for this. That is the in-universe explanation versus the DOI list, or developer explanation. The developer reason is likely because she's tied to a quest later on, but the loreheads love to theorize that this essential status represents her legendary resilience. The theory goes that Mjoll is simply too stubborn to die. She's the embodiment of the Nord spirit, battered, bruised, but never broken. Some fans even joke that she has achieved a minor form of Chim, the state of altering reality through sheer will, just so she can keep complaining about the Thieves Guild for all eternity. It's a humorous thought, but it aligns with how the world perceives her. To the bandits of the Rift, she must seem like a demon. They shoot her, they stab her, and she just stands back up. During these wandering years, Mjoll sought out the most dangerous challenges she could find. She mentions hunting bandit leaders and clearing out nests of beasts that were terrorizing local villages. She was a freelancer of justice. But unlike the Dragonborn, who often does these things because a quest marker told them to, Mjoll did it because she enjoyed the test. She loved the adrenaline. There is a certain addiction to the adventurer's life, the rush of entering a cave not knowing what is at the bottom. Is it a few skeevers, or is it a dragon priest? Mjoll lived for that coin toss. Let's be honest though, we all know the reality of clearing a cave in Skyrim. It's 10% epic combat and 90% looting every urn and burial chest for 3 gold coins and a minor potion of healing. Mjoll, however, seemed less interested in the loot and more interested in the legacy. She wanted her name to mean something. She wanted to be the kind of warrior bards sang about in the Inns of Solitude and Windhelm, and she was succeeding. Her reputation was growing. People knew the Lioness. They knew the flash of the teal blade. She was at the peak of her physical and mental prowess. She felt invincible, and why shouldn't she? She had travelled the continent, slain monsters that would make a city guard wet their breeches, and she had the scars to prove it. But invincibility is a dangerous illusion. It is a fog that blinds you to your own limits. When you win every fight, you stop expecting to lose. You stop checking the corners. You stop fearing the dark. Mjoll's confidence was her armour, but it was also her blinder. She began to crave greater challenges. Bandits were too easy. Their movements were predictable. Their steel inferior. Trolls were dangerous but stupid. She needed something more complex, something ancient. The shift in her focus was subtle at first. She stopped taking contracts for simple bounties. She started spending more time in the libraries, or what passed for them in the inns, looking at old maps. She started asking locals about the old places, the places where the snow didn't settle right, the places where the earth vibrated with a low mechanical hum. She was drawn to the Dwemer. The dwarven ruins of Skyrim are distinct from the Nordic barrows. Barrows are tombs. They are places of death and decay. But Dwemer ruins. They are places of suspended life. They are cities that never sleep, powered by steam and soul gems, maintained by automatons that have been following their programming for thousands of years after their masters vanished. They are puzzles wrapped in brass and stone. For a warrior like Mjoll, who prided herself on skill and precision, the Dwemer machines were the ultimate test. A bandit fights with emotion, fear, anger, greed. A machine fights with calculation. You cannot intimidate a dwarven spider. You cannot taunt a sphere. They just come at you, relentless and perfect. Mjoll found this fascinating. She saw it as a duel against the past itself. As she moved from hold to hold, her eyes turned toward the snowy peaks where the great brass towers pierced the sky. She felt the pull of the deep places. It was a siren song of steam and gears. She believed that with Grimsever in her hand, there was no lock she couldn't break, no metal she couldn't cleave. We can imagine her standing on a ridge in the Pale, the wind whipping her hair across her war paint, looking down at the map in her hands. She traces a line with a gloved finger to a specific location, a name that sounds like grinding metal. Mzinchaleft. She didn't know it then, but she was tracing the line to her own undoing. She was planning the expedition that would strip away her invincibility and leave her bleeding in the dark. But in that moment, standing in the sunlight, she was glorious. The Lioness, the wielder of Grimsever, the woman who walked the width of Tamriel and laughed in the face of danger. She packed her bag. She sharpened her glass blade one last time, admiring the way the firelight danced inside the crystal. She checked her straps, and she began the long walk up the mountain, humming a tune her father taught her, completely unaware that the road she loved so much was leading her straight into a dead end. To understand why Mjoll walked willingly into the moor of Mzinchaleft, we have to talk about the Dwemer, or, as the common folk of Skyrim call them, the dwarves. In the lore of the Elder Scrolls, the Dwemer are the ultimate obsession for scholars, mages, and apparently adrenaline junkie Nords. They were a race of elves, Mer, who rejected the gods, preferring instead to worship logic, reason, and technology. They built cities deep underground, tapped into the thermal energy of the planet, and constructed automatons that could rival the Daedra in power. Then, in the First Era, they vanished. Poof. An entire civilization, gone in a heartbeat, leaving behind only their brass cities and their ticking, whirring guardians. For most people in Skyrim, Dwemer ruins are places to avoid. They are death traps filled with spinning blades, fire jets, and robots that don't understand the concept of a yield surrender. Even the bandits usually only camp in the entrances, too terrified to venture into the deep folk's true domain. But for Mjoll, these ruins were a magnet. Why? Why would a warrior who loves the open road and the fresh air develop a fixation on the suffocating, oily depths of the earth? The answer lies in the challenge. Mjoll is a perfectionist of combat. Fighting a wolf is messy. It's instinct versus instinct. Fighting a bandit is chaotic. But fighting a Dwemer machine is like solving a violent puzzle. The machines have patterns. The spiders lunge and shock. The spheres roll and slash. The centurions, well, they just crush. To defeat them requires discipline. It requires a warrior to be faster than a piston and harder than a brass plate. Mjoll saw the Dwemer constructs not as monsters, but as the ultimate sparring partners. They were the benchmark. If you could dance with a centurion and live, you were truly a master of the blade. There is also the allure of the treasure, not just gold, though Dwemer ruins are notoriously rich in loot. We're talking about the artifacts, the weapons that don't rust, the armour that gleams like gold but is hard as dragon bone. Mjoll, wielding a glass greatsword, clearly had a taste for the exquisite. Grimsever was a masterpiece, but perhaps she wondered if there was something better down there, something forged in the Ethereum Wars. This obsession brings us to a core in-game fact that Mjoll shares with the player if you ask her about her past. She explicitly states, "I was reckless. I would clear ruins just to see if I could. I thought I was unstoppable." She admits that her motivation wasn't noble. It wasn't about protecting the innocent or stopping a dark ritual. It was ego. Pure, unadulterated Nord ego. She was addicted to the clear. The feeling of standing in the final chamber of a ruin, surrounded by the wreckage of ancient machines, knowing that she had conquered a place that had been sealed for thousands of years. But there is a deeper layer here, an obscure lore tidbit that connects Mjoll to the broader history of Dwemer exploration. While Mjoll herself isn't a scholar, her behaviour mirrors that of the famous, or infamous, Catria. You might remember Catria from the Dawnguard DLC, the ghost who helps you find the Ethereum shards. Catria was an adventurer consumed by the mystery of the Dwemer, to the point where she died for it. Mjoll was walking that same path. She wasn't writing papers for the Imperial City Library, but she was engaging in what we might call kinetic archaeology. She was uncovering the past by smashing it to pieces. There is a fascinating dichotomy in Mjoll's character here. She presents herself as a simple warrior, yet she spent years navigating the most complex environments in Tamriel. Dwemer ruins are filled with kinetic resonators, tonal locks, and steam pressure puzzles. Mjoll must have possessed a sharp, practical intelligence to navigate these hazards. You don't get to the boss room of a Dwemer ruin just by swinging a sword. You have to know which lever to pull, or at least have the reflexes to dodge the poison darts when you pull the wrong one. This period of her life also highlights the solitude she craved. Dwemer ruins are lonely places. There is no chatter of goblins, no chanting of necromancers, just the hum of the pipes and the hiss of steam. It's a sensory deprivation tank of danger. For a solo adventurer, it's the ultimate test of mental stability. Can you handle the silence? Can you handle the feeling that the walls are watching you? Let's touch on a community debate that often pops up regarding Mjoll and the Dwemer. Some fans theorise that Mjoll might have been hunting for something specific, perhaps a rumour of a specific artefact like Volendrung or Spellbreaker, which are Daedric artefacts often associated with Dwemer locations. While there is no in-game evidence to support this, it fits the profile. Mjoll was a high-level adventurer. She wouldn't be delving into these death pits for scrap metal. She was likely chasing legends. The tragedy of Mjoll is that she treated Mzinchaleft like just another notch on her belt. She didn't respect the ruin. She respected the danger, yes, but she didn't respect the malice of the place. She thought her skill with Grimsever was enough to bridge the gap between flesh and metal. Mzinchaleft is located in the Pale, southwest of Dawnstar. It is a massive complex, partially buried in the snow. To the casual observer, it looks like just another set of ruins. But to the trained eye, Mzinchaleft is a fortress. It was one of the major cities of the Dwemer in Skyrim. It wasn't an outpost, it was a stronghold. And strongholds have defences that go beyond simple traps. As Mjoll approached Mzinchaleft, she would have seen the steam venting from the snow, creating a localised fog that smelled of sulphur. She would have heard the distant clanking of the external pistons. Most people would turn back. They would go find a nice warm tavern in Dawnstar and drink mead until they forgot they ever saw the place. But Mjoll likely smiled. She likely checked the edge of Grimsever, adjusted her pauldrons, and walked straight into the steam. This was the height of her hubris. She had bought into her own legend. She was the Lioness, the Beast Tamer, the Ruin Breaker. She didn't know that Mzinchaleft wasn't just a ruin. It was a grinder, and it was hungry. The transition from the freezing winds of the Pale to the humid, stagnant air of the ruin's interior is a shock to the system. You go from shivering to sweating in a matter of minutes. Mjoll would have descended the initial stone ramp, her boots clicking on the metal grating. The light from the surface would have faded, replaced by the eerie, bioluminescent glow of the Falmer fungi and the harsh, orange light of the Dwemer lamps. She was entering a world where the rules of biology didn't apply. Down here, stamina didn't matter to the enemy. Pain didn't matter. Fear didn't exist. She was stepping out of the food chain and into the assembly line. Her obsession with the deep folk was about to be rewarded with a lesson in humility that would cost her blood, steel, and nearly her life. But as she stood in the antechamber, looking down into the spiralling depths of the city, she didn't feel fear. She felt anticipation. She felt the thrill of the hunt. It's easy to judge her recklessness from the safety of our gaming chairs, where we can quick save before every door. But in the moment, without the benefit of foresight, Mjoll was simply doing what she was born to do. She was pushing the envelope. She was testing the limits of her mortality against the immortality of the machine. And Mzinchaleft was waiting. The gears were turning, the steam was building pressure. The centurion in the depths was dormant, but its sensors were active. It was waiting for a heartbeat. It was waiting for the lioness. The descent into Mzinchaleft isn't a walk, it's a submergence. You leave the world of men and gods behind and enter a realm of cold logic and hot steam. For Mjoll, crossing the threshold of those massive bronze doors was like stepping into the belly of a sleeping leviathan. The heavy thud of the doors sealing behind her would have cut off the howling wind of the Pale, replacing it with a silence that was even more unsettling, the low rhythmic thrum of the ruin's heartbeat. If you've played Skyrim, you know the specific atmosphere of Mzinchaleft. It's not just dark, it's oppressive. The architecture is grand, brutalist, and entirely alien to the Nord aesthetic. Nords build with wood and rough stone, organic and warm. The Dwemer built with geometric precision, vast halls of metal and cut stone that dwarf the individual. Mjoll, for all her height and presence, would have looked like an ant wandering through a clock mechanism. As she moved deeper into the ruin, the air would have grown thick with the smell of oil and ancient dust. It's a sensory detail the game conveys through sound design, the hiss of escaping steam, the distant clanking of gears. Mjoll, the experienced adventurer, would have been on high alert. Her grip on Grimsever would have tightened. She wasn't just walking, she was stalking. Every corner was a potential ambush. Every shadow could hide a pressure plate. This is where we see the dungeoneer side of Mjoll. We often think of her as a tank, a brute force fighter, but to survive solo in a place like this, she had to be a rogue as well. She had to spot the tripwires. She had to recognize the subtle discoloration on the floor that indicated a trapdoor. She had to listen for the faint skittering of spiderworkers or the heavy rolling of a sphere. The initial sections of Mzinchaleft are deceptively quiet. It's a common Dwemer tactic: lull the intruder into a false sense of security before unleashing the defences. Mjoll would have passed through the entry halls, perhaps looting a few scrap metal pieces or marvelling at the preserved architecture. But the calm never lasts in these places. This brings us to a core in-game fact about Mzinchaleft. It is infested. While the Dwemer are gone, their city is far from empty. It has been claimed by the Fulmer, the betrayed, the twisted blind descendants of the Snow Elves who were enslaved by the Dwemer eons ago. They dwell in the dark corners, using the ancient halls as their hunting grounds. Mjoll wasn't just facing machines, she was walking into a war zone between the automated defences and the feral squatters. The presence of the farmer adds a layer of horror to the experience. The Dwemer machines are clean, sterile killers. The Femer are organic nightmares. They use poisons. They use chorus, giant insectoid monsters that spit acid. Mjoll would have known the signs. The crude fences made of chitin, the strange glowing mushrooms cultivated for light, the smell of rot that clashed with the smell of oil. As she ventured further, the silence would have been broken. Maybe it was the click of a Femer footstep. Maybe it was the whir of a dwarven spider waking up from stasis. The first combat encounter in a ruin like this is always a shock. It's loud. The clash of steel on brass rings out, echoing through the halls, alerting everything else in the complex that dinner has arrived. Mjoll's fighting style with Grimsever was perfect for these corridors. The reach of a greatsword allowed her to keep enemies at bay. She could sweep the blade in wide arcs, cleaving through the fragile legs of spiders or the unarmoured flesh of the Fulmer, but the environment fights back in a Dwemer ruin. Steam jets erupt from the floor, blinding you and burning your skin. Spinning blades pop out of the walls. The very floor you stand on can retract, dropping you into a pit. We have to imagine the sheer physical toll of this descent. Mjoll was wearing heavy armour. In the game, we sprint around indefinitely with a few stamina potions, but in reality, navigating these ruins is exhausting. The heat, the uneven terrain, the constant combat. Mjoll was burning energy with every step. She was alone, with no one to watch her back while she rested. Every moment was a battle for survival, and yet she pressed on. Why? The sunk cost fallacy of the adventurer. She was already inside. She had already fought her way past the entrance. Turning back would mean admitting defeat. It would mean wasting the supplies she had used, and the allure of the deep was pulling her. The belief that the good stuff, the master chest, the artifact, the boss, was just around the next corner. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the book Ruins of Kemmel Z, which describes the psychological effect of Dwemer ruins on explorers. It mentions a fever of the deep, a compulsion to keep going down, driven by the hypnotic geometry and the humming of the machinery. Mjoll, for all her discipline, was likely susceptible to this. The ruin draws you in. It promises answers. It promises power. As she reached the lower levels, the architecture would have changed. The halls became grander, the machinery more complex. She was approaching the heart of the city, the animunculary, the place where the Dwemer built their guardians. The air would have been hotter here, vibrating with the energy of the soul gems that powered the facility. Mjoll was now deep in enemy territory. She was miles away from the nearest friendly face. If she screamed, no one would hear her. If she fell, her bones would simply become another decoration in the halls of the dead. This isolation is a key part of the bedtime lore experience. We are safe in our beds listening to this story, but Mjoll was in the most hostile environment imaginable, utterly alone. But she wasn't afraid, not yet. The adrenaline was pumping. Grimsever was singing in her hands. She felt powerful. She felt like the queen of the ruin. She had defeated the scouts. She had smashed the spiders. She was ready for the king. Little did she know, the king was ready for her. The transition to the final zone of Mzinchaleft is marked by a massive gate. A gate that requires a lever to open. A gate that screams boss fight ahead to anyone with gaming literacy. But Mjoll didn't have a HUD. She didn't have a warning prompt. She just saw another door, another obstacle to be breached. She pulled the lever. The gears ground together, the gate hissed open, and she stepped into the arena. The room was vast, dominated by a central platform and surrounded by pipes and valves. In the centre stood a docking station, and in that station, silent and imposing, was the dwarven centurion. It is a moment of calm before the storm. The centurion doesn't attack immediately. It wakes up. Steam vents from its shoulders. Its eyes, glowing red lenses, flicker to life. The massive hammer arm twitches. The axe arm rotates. It steps out of its dock with a ground-shaking thud. For the first time since entering the ruin, Mjoll might have felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't a spider. This wasn't a Falmer. This was a walking siege engine. It was 12 feet of solid Dwemer metal, powered by a soul that had been trapped for thousands of years. But the Lioness doesn't back down. She gripped Grimsever. She roared a challenge that echoed off the brass walls, and she charged. The clash that followed would be legendary. Flesh and glass against steam and brass. A battle of attrition in the dark. A battle that Mjoll was destined to lose, but one that would define her legend forever. The gates of Mzinchaleft had closed behind her. There was no way out but through, and standing in her way was the Iron Giant of the Deep. The stage was set for the tragedy. The dice were rolled, and they came up snake eyes. The clash of glass against metal is a sound that sets your teeth on edge. It's a high-pitched, resonant shriek, vibrating up the arms and settling deep in the marrow of the shoulder bones. As Mjoll drove Grimsever into the phalanx of the ruin's defences, that sound became the soundtrack of her survival. The room she had breached wasn't just a boss arena. It was a killbox, a converging point for every defensive system the Dwemer had left active and every feral instinct the Falmer possessed. To understand the severity of the situation Mjoll found herself in, we have to look at the ecology of a Dwemer ruin. It is a three-way war. You have the adventurer, the interloper who doesn't belong. You have the machines, the antibodies of the Stone City, programmed to purge anything with a pulse. And you have the Falmer, the parasites who have infested the shell of their former masters. Usually, the machines and the Falmer kill each other. But Mjoll, radiating the heat of a living Nord and the noise of a heavy armour wearer, acted as a lightning rod. She became the priority target for both factions. The first wave wasn't the giant she had spotted in the gloom. It was the scurrying vanguard. Dwarven spiders are deceptive. In the game, they are little more than nuisances, ankle biters that you swat away for a bit of scrap metal. But in the reality of the lore, they are terrifying feats of engineering. They are fast, erratic, and relentless. They don't feel pain. They don't hesitate. They simply leap, their pincer legs sparking with electricity. Mjoll was immediately beset by a swarm of them. Imagine trying to swing a 5-foot greatsword at targets that are barely knee-high and moving like erratic clockwork toys. It's a nightmare for a heavy weapon user. She had to rely on the pommel, smashing them into gears and springs, while keeping her guard up against the arcing shock spells that smelled of ozone and singed hair. Every shock was a muscle spasm, a momentary loss of control that could be fatal. But the spiders were just the distraction. The real threat came rolling out of the steam vents in the walls, the dwarven spheres. Here is a core in-game fact that players learn the hard way. Dwarven spheres are the mid-tier nightmares of Skyrim. When folded, they look like harmless bronze balls, perhaps a piece of debris or a decorative orb. But when they detect a threat, they unfold with a terrifying transformer-like efficiency into a humanoid construct armed with a crossbow and a sword arm. They are taller than a man, faster than a horse, and armoured in Dwemer metal, which is renowned for being virtually impervious to the ravages of time. Mjoll was now dancing a deadly waltz with two of these guardians. The sound of their monowheel bases grinding against the stone floor was deafening. They moved with a fluidity that mocked human biology, pivoting instantly, their crossbows firing bolts with the force of a siege weapon. Mjoll's heavy armour, the banded iron she trusted, caught a bolt on the pauldron. It didn't penetrate, but the impact would have felt like a hammer blow, bruising the muscle underneath and staggering her. She retaliated with Grimsever. This is where the quality of the glass blade shone. A lesser steel sword might have chipped or bent against the Dwemer alloy. But Grimsever was forged from malachite, a material with a higher hardness rating than ebony. It bit into the brass. Mjoll, using her momentum, cleaved the arm off one sphere, sending sparks cascading like fireworks in the dark. She was efficient, brutal, and focused, but then the shadows hissed. The Falmer had arrived. Attracted by the noise of the combat, the betrayed crept down from the ceiling pipes and the high ledges. They are the tragic monsters of Skyrim, the devolved snow elves who were blinded and enslaved by the Dwemer eons ago. Now they are masters of hearing and smell. In the chaos of the battle, Mjoll was a beacon of noise. The introduction of the Falmer changed the dynamic of the fight from a duel to a brawl. The machines were predictable, the Falmer were not. They utilised chorus poison, a vile substance distilled from the giant insects they herd like cattle. A single scratch from a Falmer war axe coated in this toxin doesn't just hurt, it cripples. It saps stamina, blurs vision, and causes a burning sensation that feels like liquid fire in the veins. Mjoll had to pivot. She was no longer just fighting for glory, she was fighting for space. She swung Grimsever in wide, desperate arcs, keeping the pale, crouching figures at bay. The Falmer, blind but uncannily accurate, struck at the joints of her armour. They didn't care about the machines. In fact, one of the most chaotic elements of these ruins is the friendly fire. A dwarven sphere swung its blade at Mjoll, missed and decapitated a Falmer skirmisher. Mjoll likely used this chaos, positioning herself so the machines would block the Falmer, turning the three-way melee into a shield. There is a fan theory, or rather a recurring debate in the community, about the intelligence of the Falmer. Some argue they are little more than beasts, driven by hunger and hatred. Others point to their crafting, their magic, and their organised ambushes as proof that they possess a high, albeit alien, intelligence. They steal surface dwellers not just for food, but for labour. Mjoll, in the thick of it, wasn't debating their IQ, she was experiencing their malice. They coordinated, they flanked. When she engaged a sphere, a Falmer would lunge for her hamstrings. The physical toll of this gauntlet was immense. We need to remember that Mjoll is human. Well, Nord. She has limits. Her breath would have been coming in ragged gasps, her lungs burning from the mixture of steam, dust, and the metallic tang of blood. The heat in the lower levels of Mzinchaleft is suffocating. It's geothermal heat, dry and intense. Sweating inside heavy armour leads to dehydration and exhaustion very quickly. Every swing of the greatsword felt heavier than the last. The Lioness was being bled, not by a single fatal wound, but by 1,000 cuts and bruises. And amidst this chaos, she encountered an obscure lore tidbit in real time. The Dwemer machines bleed. Not blood, of course, but a specific fluid known as dwarven oil. In the game, this is just an alchemy ingredient. But in the lore, and in the visceral reality of combat, this oil is a hazard. It is slick, highly flammable, and incredibly hot when released from a pressurized system. As Mjoll severed the hydraulic lines of a sphere, the oil would have sprayed out, coating the floor and her armour. It made the ground treacherous. One slip on the slick stone would mean death. It turned the battlefield into an ice rink of industrial lubricant. Yet she prevailed against the wave. It is a testament to her skill. She shattered the lens of a sphere, blinding it before driving her sword into its central gyro. She kicked a Falmer into a steam vent, listening to its shriek as the scalding vapour cooked it alive. She was a whirlwind of teal glass and iron will. But the victory was Pyrrhic. She was tired. Her armour was compromised, straps cut, plates dented. She had likely used whatever potion she had brought with her. The silence that fell after the last sphere collapsed wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, ringing silence of the aftermath. She stood amidst the wreckage, leaning on Grimsever, her chest heaving. The floor was littered with scrap metal, chorus chitin, and the bodies of the betrayed. She had cleared the room, she had survived the gauntlet, but Mzinchaleft wasn't done with her. As she caught her breath, wiping the sweat and oil from her eyes, the ground beneath her trembled. A deep, resonant thrumming started, low at first, then building in intensity until the loose screws on the floor began to dance. The steam vents hissed in unison, a synchronized release of pressure that sounded like a massive beast exhaling. She looked up toward the massive docking station at the far end of the chamber, the one she had charged toward earlier, the one that had seemed dormant while she fought the minions. The steam cleared, the red lights ignited. The battle she had just fought, the one that had drained her stamina and dulled her edge, was merely the opening act. The gatekeeper was awake, and he was angry. This moment, right here, is the crux of Mjoll's tragedy. If she had been at full strength, fresh from a rest, with her armour intact, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Perhaps the lioness would have slain the giant. But the ruin is a smart predator. It wears you down before it goes for the throat. It ensures you're weak before it reveals its true strength. Mjoll straightened up. She gripped the hilt of Grimsever with blood-slicked gloves. She didn't run. Nords don't run from the end. They greet it. She watched as the massive brass centurion stepped down from its podium, the floor cracking under its immense weight. The fight for her life had ended. The fight for her soul was about to begin. The dwarven centurion is the apex predator of the Skyrim underground. When you encounter one in-game, your first instinct is usually to backpedal, check your potion inventory, and maybe reconsider your life choices. But for Mjoll, backing down was not an option. The door behind her was sealed, the room was filled with the carnage of the previous wave, and the only path forward lay through the legs of the brass titan that now loomed over her. The scale of a centurion is difficult to appreciate until you are standing in its shadow. It stands roughly 10 to 12 feet tall, a humanoid effigy constructed of thick golden-hued plates. It is a masterpiece of intimidation. Unlike the spiders or spheres, which are utilitarian, the centurion is designed to look like a god of war. Its face is a stylized mask of impassive judgment, glowing with the red light of the optical sensors behind it. As it stepped off the podium, the floor didn't just vibrate, it groaned. The sheer tonnage of the construct meant that every footfall was a localized earthquake. Mjoll, despite her fatigue, fell into a combat stance. She knew she couldn't block this. You don't parry a hydraulic hammer the size of a beer keg with a glass sword. You have to dodge. You have to be water flowing around a rock. The fight began with a sound that was less of a roar and more of a steam whistle scream. The centurion vented pressure from its shoulder stacks, creating a cloud of obscuring vapour. This is a classic boss mechanic. Obscure the vision, induce panic. Mjoll, squinting through the stinging mist, had to rely on audio cues. She heard the grinding of gears, the whine of a servo motor spooling up, and she threw herself to the left. A split second later, the centurion's hammer arm smashed into the spot where she had been standing. The impact cracked the stone floor, sending shards of rock flying like shrapnel. If she had been there, she would have been paced. The wind of the swing alone was enough to stagger her. This brings us to a core in-game fact that defines the centurion encounter, the steam breath attack. As Mjoll circled the giant looking for a chink in the armour, the centurion's chest plates shifted. It leaned forward and unleashed a torrent of superheated steam. In the game mechanics, this functions very similarly to a dragon shout, dealing continuous damage over time. For Mjoll, this wasn't just a health bar ticking down, it was being boiled alive in her armour. The steam jet caught her on the flank. The heat was instantaneous and excruciating. It bypassed the physical defence of her iron plates, cooking the leather undergarments and searing her skin. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pain, but she used that pain as fuel. She lunged forward, under the arc of the steam and drove Grimsever into the centurion's knee joint. The glass blade sang as it bit into the brass. Grimsever lived up to its name. It severed a hydraulic line, spraying hot oil across the floor. The centurion stumbled, its mechanical gait disrupted. For a fleeting moment, Mjoll thought she had the advantage. She was faster. She was smarter. She was the David to this Goliath. But here is where the community debate regarding the nature of the Dwemer constructs adds a layer of chilling ambiguity to the fight. There has long been a theory among lore enthusiasts that the centurions are not merely robots, but receptacles for souls. The theory posits that the centurion dynamo cores, those spinning red magical engines you loot from them, are actually utilising soul gems, perhaps even the souls of the Dwemer themselves, to power the AI. If this theory holds water, Mjoll wasn't fighting a machine. She was fighting a ghost trapped in a shell of indestructible metal, a ghost that remembered how to kill. The centurion didn't just react to her strike, it anticipated her follow-up. As she went for a second strike on the leg, the construct pivoted with a speed that defied its bulk. It didn't try to hammer her, it backhanded her. The backhand of a centurion is not a slap. It is a collision with a moving wall. The metal fist connected with Mjoll's midsection. The sound was sickening. The crunch of her banded iron breastplate collapsing inward, the snap of ribs giving way. Mjoll was lifted off her feet and thrown across the room. She slammed into a pile of scrap metal, the remains of the spheres she had destroyed earlier, and crumpled to the floor. The world went grey. Her vision swam. The breath was knocked out of her, and when she tried to inhale, a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest told her that her ribs were likely perforating something important. She tried to stand. This is the mark of the lioness. Even when her body was screaming, "Stay down," her will was screaming, "Get up." She managed to get to one knee, using Grimsever as a crutch. Blood was dripping from her nose and mouth, pattering onto the dusty floor. The centurion turned slowly. It didn't rush. It knew it had won. It stalked toward her, the red light of its eyes fixing on her broken form. The steam hissing from its knee joint sounded like laughter. This is the moment where the invincibility finally shattered. Mjoll looked up at the towering machine and realized she was going to die. Not in a glorious battle against a dragon under the open sky, but here, in the dark, crushed by a relic of a dead civilization. She had cleared too many ruins. She had pushed her luck one time too many. But she wasn't going to die on her knees. She forced herself to stand, swaying unsteadily. She raised Grimsever one last time. The blade was heavy now, leaden in her numb hands. She waited for the final blow. The centurion raised its hammer arm high. It was a slow, executioner-style wind-up. Mjoll braced herself. She couldn't dodge. Her legs wouldn't listen. She could only hope to deflect, to perhaps guide the blow away from her head. As the hammer came down, Mjoll swung Grimsever upward in a desperate parry. Now let's talk about an obscure lore tidbit regarding material physics in the Elder Scrolls. We know that malachite, glass, is harder than steel, but it is also brittle under specific types of stress. It has a high tensile strength, but a lower fracture toughness compared to something like ebony. When a massive blunt force meets a rigid crystalline structure, something has to give. The hammer struck the flat of the blade. The force of the impact was cataclysmic. It drove Mjoll into the ground as if she were a nail. The shockwave travelled through the sword, through her arms, and exploded in her shoulders. She felt her collarbone snap. The floor beneath her cracked into a spiderweb of fissures. But she was alive. The parry had worked, in the sense that her skull wasn't flattened, but the cost was total incapacitation. She lay on her back, staring up at the vaulted ceiling, unable to move her arms. Her armour was a ruin of twisted metal and leather. Her body was a map of agony. The centurion paused. Its programming seemed to be processing the fact that the biological unit was still functioning. It raised its arm again. Mjoll closed her eyes. She thought of the road. She thought of the cold wind in the pale. She thought of her father. She waited for the darkness. But the darkness didn't come. Instead, a new sound cut through the noise of the machinery. A shouting voice. A desperate human voice echoing from the upper gantry. "Hey, over here, you ugly bucket of bolts!" It was a distraction. A frantic, terrified distraction. The centurion's head swiveled. its threat assessment protocols re-evaluated. A new target had appeared, a target that was making a lot of noise and throwing rocks. Mjoll drifted. The pain was receding, replaced by a cold numbness that started in her fingers and toes and crept toward her heart. She was conscious, but only just. She watched through a haze as the golden giant turned away from her. She had survived the crushing blow, but she was broken. The Lioness of Riften, the adventurer who had walked the width of Tamriel, was now a heap of broken bones on a dungeon floor. And as her consciousness faded, the last thing she felt was the absence of the weight in her hand. Her hand was empty. Grimsever had been knocked away in the impact. She was alone, she was unarmed, and she was dying. The silence of the ruin returned, broken only by the heavy footsteps of the centurion moving away to chase the new annoyance. Mjoll lay in the oil and the dust, her breath coming in shallow, bubbling rasps. The deep folk had claimed their tithe. They had taken her strength, they had taken her pride, and soon they would take her life. The ringing in Mjoll's ears was louder than the grinding gears of the city. It was a high, sustained tone, like a tuning fork struck against the inside of her skull. It drowned out the hiss of the steam and the heavy thud of the centurion's footsteps as it lumbered away after the new intruder. Mjoll lay on the cold stone, her body a map of broken lines. Her breath came in shallow, jagged gasps, each one a negotiation with the fractured ribs that threatened to puncture her lungs. But her eyes were open, and they were fixed on one thing. Lying about 10 feet away, resting in a pool of dark, viscous oil and Dwemer hydraulic fluid, was Grimsever. The glass greatsword looked impossibly beautiful amidst the carnage. The teal malachite blade caught the ambient light of the bioluminescent fungi and the harsh orange glow of the centurion's distant vents, refracting them into a kaleidoscope of colours. It didn't look damaged. While Mjoll was broken, the sword was pristine. It lay there, indifferent to her pain, a masterpiece of smithing that had outlasted its master's ability to wield it. This moment, this specific visual of the weapon just out of reach, is the defining trauma of Mjoll's life. It is the scene that plays on a loop in her nightmares. In the game, when you find Grimsever, it is usually lying on the ground near the boss chest, or propped up against a table in the final chamber of Mzinchaleft. It's a static object, a quest item waiting to be retrieved. But for Mjoll in this moment, it was her lifeline. It was her identity. Without that sword, she wasn't the lioness. She was just another gnawed corpse waiting to happen. She tried to move. Her brain sent the command to her right arm. Reach out, grab the hilt, get up. The arm twitched, fingers scraping uselessly against the stone. The connection was severed. Her shoulder was a ruin of torn ligament and shattered bone. The pain that flared from the attempt was so white-hot that it nearly caused her to black out again. She gasped, a wet, rattling sound, and tears of frustration mingled with the blood on her face. This brings us to a core in-game fact that players often overlook. Grimsever is a two-handed weapon. In Skyrim mechanics, two-handed weapons require substantial stamina and strength to use effectively. They are heavy, deliberate tools of war. Mjoll in her prime swung it like a baton. But lying there, broken, the sheer mass of the weapon became a mocking reality. Even if she could reach it, she couldn't lift it. She couldn't defend herself with it. The weapon had become a paperweight, and she was the paper being blown away by the wind of her own failure. There is a profound psychological horror in being separated from your weapon in a dungeon. For an adventurer, the weapon is the only thing that stands between you and the void. It is the only no you have against a world that wants to eat you. To see it lying there, abandoned, is to accept that you are no longer a predator. You are prey. As Mjoll stared at the blade, a pair of hands grabbed her by the shoulders of her battered cuirass. They were not the metallic claws of a machine, nor the chitinous grip of a falmer. They were human hands, warm, desperate, and shaking. "I've got you," a voice whispered, cracking with terror. "I've got you, Mjoll, don't die on me. Please, by the 8, don't die." It was the distraction. The man who had thrown the rock. He was dragging her backward, away from the light, away from the centurion, and most painfully, away from Grimsever. Mjoll tried to protest. She tried to say, "The sword. My sword." But all that came out was a gargle of blood. She locked eyes with the blade as she was pulled across the rough floor. The friction of the stone against her armour sent vibrations through her broken body, but she barely felt them. She was focused entirely on the widening distance between her hand and the hilt. 10 feet became 20, 20 became 30. The sword grew smaller, a lonely shard of blue ice in a sea of darkness. This scene has sparked a significant community debate regarding Mjoll's psychology. Why, in all the years between this event and the Dragonborn's arrival, did Mjoll never hire mercenaries to retrieve the blade? She is a woman of influence in Riften. She has the respect of the guards, even if she hates the Jarl. Why leave it there? Some fans argue it's a plot hole, a simple contrivance to give the player a quest. But the darker, more psychological theory suggests that Mjoll couldn't go back. Not physically, but mentally. The trauma of this moment, the helplessness, the crushing defeat by the centurion created a mental block. Grimsever wasn't just lost, it was the marker of her mortality. To go back for it would be to face the reality that she wasn't invincible. It represents the grave of her old self, the wandering adventurer who thought she could conquer the world. Leaving it there was a subconscious admission that that version of Mjoll died in Mzinchaleft. As she was dragged into the shadows of a side tunnel, the centurion turned back. It had lost interest in the distraction and was returning to its patrol route. Mjoll watched as the massive brass foot of the construct slammed down inches from Grimsever. The floor shook. The sword rattled against the stone, spinning slightly on its crossguard as if waving goodbye. The lighting in the room shifted as the steam cycled. For a brief second, the red eye of the centurion reflected off the glass blade. It looked like the sword itself was bleeding. It was a visual metaphor that would sear itself into Mjoll's memory. The tool of her justice had been claimed by the machine. It belonged to the deep folk now. Here is an obscure lore tidbit that adds a layer of mysticism to this loss. In the book De Rerum Direnis, and in various smithing texts throughout the series, there is a recurring concept that high-quality weapons, particularly those made of ebony or glass, malachite, possess a form of memory or resonance with their wielder. They aren't sentient, but they are attuned. A blade used for years by a specific warrior balances differently in their hands than in anyone else's. By abandoning Grimsever, Mjoll wasn't just losing a piece of equipment worth a few thousand gold pieces. She was severing a spiritual bond. She was leaving behind the steel extension of her will. The sever in Grimsever suddenly took on a literal horrific meaning. It wasn't severing the heads of her enemies anymore, it was severing her connection to her past. The dragging continued. Her rescuer was strong, fueled by adrenaline, but he was clumsy. He bumped her against doorframes, scraped her legs against debris. Mjoll's vision began to tunnel. The pain was becoming abstract, a distant roar that belonged to someone else. The only thing that remained sharp was the image of the sword, and then they turned a corner. A heavy stone wall slid between her and the main chamber. The glow of the sword was cut off. Darkness. That was the moment the lioness broke. Not when the hammer hit her chest, but when the line of sight was broken. When she could no longer see the teal glint. A sob escaped her throat, ragged and wet. It was the sound of total, absolute defeat. She had entered Mzinchaleft as a legend. She was leaving it as a burden. She was being hauled out like a sack of loot, except she was broken and valueless. The ruin had chewed her up and spat her out, keeping her teeth as a trophy. The journey back up to the surface is a blur in the narrative, a gap in Mjoll's memory filled only with flashes of agony and the sound of her rescuer's laboured breathing. But that moment of separation, the abandonment of the blade, is crystal clear. It is the anchor point of her trauma. It explains so much about the Mjoll we meet in Riften. It explains why she hates corruption and thieves, because she knows what it feels like to have something stolen from you, even if that thief was a giant robot. It explains why she patrols the market but never leaves the city. She's a guard dog who's afraid to leave the porch because she remembers what is waiting in the woods. Grimsever lay in the dark, cooling in the draft of the steam vents. The centurion resumed its silent vigil. The spider scuttled back out to repair the damage. The ruin reset itself, indifferent to the tragedy that had just played out. The sword would wait there, collecting dust and oil, a silent monument to the hubris of the lioness. And Mjoll, drifting into unconsciousness, felt a coldness settle in her heart that no amount of mead or fire could ever truly thaw. She had survived, yes, but she had left the best part of herself on the killing floor of Mzinchaleft. The silence of Mzinchaleft, once the centurion had returned to its patrol, was not a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that amplified every small sound. The drip of condensation, the settling of ancient stone, and the ragged, terrifyingly shallow breathing of Mjoll the Lioness. Standing over her broken form was Aerin. If you look at Aerin in the game, standing in the bee and barb or walking the plank pathways of Riften, he appears entirely unremarkable. He is an Imperial, a race known more for diplomacy and commerce than for berserker rages. He wears fine clothes, not armour, but the civilian attire of a merchant or a minor noble. He carries a dagger, perhaps, but it looks more like a letter opener than a weapon of war. Yet, in this moment, deep in the bowels of the earth, this unremarkable man was attempting the impossible. He was trying to move a mountain. We have to appreciate the sheer physics of the situation. Mjoll is a Nord. Nords are physically larger and denser than Imperials. She's also wearing a full set of banded iron armour. In Skyrim, armour has a weight value that affects your carry capacity. Banded iron is heavy. It includes the cuirass, boots, gauntlets, and the padding underneath. Add to that Mjoll's own muscle mass, and Aerin was looking at dragging roughly 250 pounds of dead weight up a series of inclines, stairs, and slippery ramps. This brings us to a core in-game fact that often gets memed but is actually quite impressive. Aerin has no combat class. He is classified in the game files simply as a citizen. He has no perks in heavy armour, no perks in restoration, and no perks in sneak. He is, statistically speaking, a level 1 NPC in a level 30 dungeon. By all rights, he should have triggered a trap or been one-shot by a Fairma arrow 5 minutes after entering the ruin. So how did he do it? How did this civilian pull the broken lioness out of the fire? Adrenaline is a powerful alchemist. It turns fear into focus and weakness into hysterical strength. Aerin grabbed the straps of Mjoll's cuirass, dug his heels into the cracks of the stone floor and pulled. He didn't lift her, he dragged her. The metal of her greaves scraped against the stone with a sound that must have seemed deafening to his panicked ears. Scrape, step, scrape, step. He wasn't thinking about the history of the Dwemer or the value of the loot. He was thinking about the woman who had, perhaps foolishly, become the centre of his universe. This leads us directly into the heart of the fan theory and community debate surrounding Aerin. As we mentioned earlier, the Skyrim community generally dislikes Aerin. He is often viewed as a stalker or a simp who refuses to leave Mjoll alone, even after she marries the Dragonborn. Players often look for creative ways to remove him from the picture without angering Mjoll, but this rescue mission challenges that narrative. A stalker watches from the shadows. A simp might offer compliments, but a man who willingly walks into a meat grinder like Mzinchaleft, armed with nothing but a dagger and a prayer, to save someone who might never love him back, that is a different kind of devotion. It borders on the knightly, or perhaps the insane. It suggests that Aerin's attachment to Mjoll isn't just an annoyance, it is forged in the fires of a traumatic event. He saw her at her absolute lowest. He saw the invincible lioness reduced to a pile of broken bones and blood. He saved her life when she couldn't save herself. That kind of shared trauma creates a bond that is difficult for an outsider, like the player, to understand or break. The journey back up through the ruin was a nightmare of stealth. Aerin couldn't fight. If a Falmer spotted them, it was over. If a sphere rolled their way, it was over. He had to become a ghost. He moved in the spaces between the steam vents. When he heard the chittering of the betrayed, he froze, pressing himself and Mjoll into the dark recesses of the machinery. Imagine the tension. He's crouching in the dark, his hand clamped over Mjoll's mouth to muffle her groans of pain, while a blind, twisted elf sniffs the air 3 feet away. The smell of the Falmer, rot and old mushrooms, would have been overpowering. Aerin, a man used to the perfumes of the city, must have been retching, but he held his ground. He used the environment. He threw loose gears down hallways to distract the spiders. He waited for the steam cycles to create noise cover before dragging Mjoll across open areas. It was a masterclass in stealth by someone who had never been trained in it. It was the stealth of the desperate. But Mjoll was fading. Her breathing was becoming wet, a sign of internal bleeding or a punctured lung. Aerin had to stop. He had to play doctor in the dark. here is an obscure lore tidbit regarding healing in Tamriel. We often take potions for granted. Red bottle, health goes up. But according to texts like The Art of Alchemy and various dialogue lines from healers, standard healing potions are not miracle cures for structural damage. They accelerate the body's natural clotting and knitting processes, but they don't magically set bones. If you drink a healing potion while your ribs are displaced, the potion might heal the flesh around the displacement, causing it to heal wrong. Aerin likely knew this. He wasn't a healer, but he was an educated man. He had to make a choice. He likely had a few minor potions on him, standard traveller's kit. He couldn't just pour them down her throat. He had to position her. He had to try and straighten her limbs as best he could before administering the aid. Picture him in a quiet corner of the ruin, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of a jeweled vein. He is trembling, his hands slick with her blood. He is whispering to her, "Stay with me, Mjoll, stay with me." He uncorks a potion, smelling of stale strawberries and charcoal as they are often described in flavour text, and carefully tilts it into her mouth. It's not enough to fix her. Her arm is still shattered, her chest is still crushed, but it's enough to stop the immediate bleeding. It's enough to keep her heart beating for another hour. It buys them time. The hardest part of the ascent was the verticality. Mzinchaleft is deep. To get out, you have to go up. There are ramps, yes, but there are also lifts. The great lifts of the Dwemer cities are marvels of engineering, massive platforms that can transport supplies from the blackest depths to the surface in seconds. But finding one and activating it is a puzzle in itself. Aerin, exhausted, his fine clothes torn and stained with grease and blood, managed to locate one of the secondary lifts. These aren't the convenient levers we pull in-game. In the lore, activating a Dwemer lift often requires a kinetic key or the manipulation of specific valves. Aerin fumbled with the controls. He was an Imperial. He understood administration, not steam mechanics. But desperation is a universal language. He pulled levers. He turned wheels. And then the gears caught. The platform shuddered. With a groan of rusted metal that echoed through the entire ruin, the lift began to rise. The ride up was a slow transition from hell to purgatory. The air grew colder. The smell of ozone faded, replaced by the smell of cold stone and eventually fresh air. For Mjoll drifting in and out of consciousness, the sensation of rising must have felt like dying. The vibration of the lift floor against her back, the darkness giving way to grey light. When the lift finally breached the surface, emerging into the exterior housing of Mzinchaleft, the shock of the cold was violent. The Pale is one of the coldest regions in Skyrim. The wind howled through the open grating of the lift tower carrying snow and ice. Aerin didn't stop to celebrate. He couldn't. They were still in the wilderness. They were miles from civilization, but they were out of the hole. He dragged her off the lift and into the shelter of a nearby rock formation out of the biting wind. He collapsed beside her, his lungs burning, his muscles seizing up. He looked at the woman he had just saved. She was a mess. Her face was swollen, her armor was destroyed, and she was barely clinging to life. But she was alive. This act of heroism completely recontextualizes Aerin. He isn't a warrior. He isn't the Dragonborn. He is a normal man who looked at a situation that would make a Daedric prince flinch, and he stepped into it because he couldn't bear the thought of a world without Mjoll in it. He sat there in the snow, shivering violently in his thin clothes, watching the chest of the lioness rise and fall. He had saved her body. But as he looked at her empty hands, hands that were shaped to hold a sword that was no longer there, he likely realized that he couldn't save her spirit. He had dragged the shell of Mjoll out of the dark, but the lioness was still down there, trapped under the brass heel of the centurion. The sun began to rise over the mountains of the Pale, casting a pale, indifferent light on the two figures huddled in the snow. It was the start of a new day, but for Mjoll and Aerin, it was the start of a long, painful shadow that would stretch all the way to Riften. Aerin checked her pulse one last time. Weak, thready, but there. He wrapped his own cloak around her, shivering as the cold bit into his own skin. He stood up, looking south toward the road. He had to find help. He had to find a cart, a healer, anything. The rescue was over. The recovery was just beginning. And in the silence of the snowy tundra, the only sound was the wind, whistling a mournful tune through the ruins of Mzinchaleft, mocking the thieves who thought they could steal from the deep. Waking up from a near-death experience isn't like in the movies. You don't gasp, sit bolt upright, and immediately ask, "Where am I?" In reality, and certainly in the gritty realism of the Elder Scrolls lore, waking up is a slow, agonizing process of piecing together a shattered reality. For Mjoll, consciousness returned in fragments. The smell of medicinal herbs, the warmth of a fire that wasn't threatening to burn her alive, the creaking of wood, not the metallic groaning of a Dwemer ruin, but the organic settling sounds of a timber house. She wasn't in Mzinchaleft anymore, she was in Riften. Specifically, she was in a bed on the second floor of Aerin's house. This building is a core in-game fact that players often run past without a second thought. It is located in the upper tier of the city, nestled between the Temple of Mara and the marketplace. It is a modest home, comfortable, but by no means a palace. For the Lioness, who was used to the vast open skies of the tundra or the grand halls of ancient ruins, this room must have felt like a cage. A soft, warm cage, but a cage nonetheless. The recovery process was brutal. We have to remember the extent of her injuries: broken ribs, a shattered shoulder, likely a concussion, and severe burns from the steam. In a world where magical healing is available but expensive and rare, most people rely on the old ways: rest, poultices, time. Mjoll spent weeks staring at the ceiling beams. This period of forced inactivity is crucial to understanding her character shift. Mjoll is a woman of action. She defines herself by what she does. She hunts, she fights, she explores. Stripped of her ability to move, stripped of her sword, she was forced to simply be. And what she was a cripple in a city of thieves. From her window, as she regained the strength to sit up, she could look out over the city of Riften. And what she saw made her blood boil even hotter than the centurion's steam breath. Riften is a city of layers. On the surface, it's a bustling trade hub on the shores of Lake Honrich. But peel back the layer of commerce, and you find the rot. From her vantage point, Mjoll watched the daily rhythm of the city. She saw the guards looking the other way when a stall owner was intimidated. She saw the pickpockets working the crowd near the Bee and Barb. She saw the palpable fear in the eyes of the common folk when a member of the Blackbriar family walked by. This brings us to a fascinating, obscure lore tidbit involving the visual language of the city. If you look closely at the doorframes of various buildings in Riften and other cities, you will see small etched symbols. These are shadow marks. They are the secret code of the Thieves Guild, used to communicate information to their operatives. A circle with a line through it means empty, nothing to steal. A triangle means safe. A diamond means Thieves Guild cash. Mjoll, with nothing to do but watch, began to notice these patterns. She didn't know the code initially, but she was a hunter. She recognized the markings of a pack. She saw a thief touch a doorframe, glance at the mark and move on. She saw the coordination. She realized that the city wasn't just suffering from random crime, it was under occupation. The Thieves Guild wasn't a rumour, it was an infrastructure. They had branded the city like cattle. This realization transformed her. In the wilds, she fought monsters that acted on instinct. Here, she was watching monsters that acted on greed and politics. It was a different kind of evil. It wasn't the clean, honest violence of a bear or a Dwemer machine. It was slimy. It was cowardly. And because she was broken and bedridden, she couldn't do a thing about it. The feeling of helplessness is a powerful incubator for rage. Mjoll lay there, nursing her shattered shoulder, and let that rage harden into a diamond-hard resolve. She couldn't wander Tamriel anymore, not yet, and perhaps not ever in the same way. But she could fight this. She could fight here. Aerin played the role of the nursemaid during this time. He brought her soup, he changed her bandages, he read to her, and in doing so, he unknowingly cemented the dynamic that frustrates so many players. He made himself indispensable to her survival, but in a way that stripped her of her agency. He was the caretaker, she was the invalid. This leads to a community debate regarding the nature of Mjoll's affection for Aerin. Does she love him, or does she feel an immense crushing debt of obligation? Some fans argue that Mjoll's dialogue about Aerin, "I've never seen him fight, but he's got the heart of a lion," is her way of trying to elevate him to her level, to justify why a legendary warrior keeps a civilian around. She is projecting her own values onto him. She needs him to be a hero because if he's just a nice guy who dragged her out of a hole, the power dynamic becomes uncomfortable. She owes him her life, and that is a debt that can never fully be paid, essentially trapping her in Riften just as effectively as her injuries. As the weeks turned into months, Mjoll's physical strength returned, but the phantom pain remained, not just in her shoulder, but in her hands. The absence of Grimsever was a constant ache. She tried to wield standard steel greatswords. You can see her training with one in her house sometimes, but they felt wrong. They were unbalanced. They didn't sing when she swung them. They were dead metal. Without a signature weapon, and with her body still stiff from the trauma, Mjoll had to adapt her approach. She couldn't just charge into the Ratway and slaughter the guild, though the thought likely crossed her mind daily. She had to become a symbol. She started walking the streets. At first, it was just for rehabilitation, leaning heavily on Aerin, but soon she was walking alone. She donned her armour again, not the ruined set from Mzinchaleft, but a new set of heavy plate. She painted her face. She made herself visible. She became a fixture in the market. She didn't arrest anyone. She wasn't a guard. She didn't attack anyone. She wasn't a murderer. She just watched. She stood there, arms crossed, staring down the thieves. She became a living gargoyle, a statue of judgment in the centre of the corruption. And it worked. To a degree. The thieves of Riften are bullies, and bullies hate being watched. When Mjoll was present, the pickpocketing stopped. The intimidation attempts faltered. She carved out a zone of safety around her simply by existing. But this new purpose was born of a deep bitterness. Mjoll talks often about how Riften is the worst city in Skyrim. She hates it. She hates the damp, she hates the smell, she hates the Jarl. Yet she stays. Why? Because leaving would feel like running away again. She ran, or was dragged, from Mzinchaleft. She refused to run from Riften. The layout of the city played a cruel joke on her too. The Thieves Guild headquarters, the Cistern, is located physically beneath the market. Mjoll spends her days standing on the wooden planks of the upper city, while the people she hates the most are laughing and drinking directly under her boots. She knows they are there. She can probably hear the muffled sounds of their revelry through the grates. It is a spatial metaphor for her impotence. She is the surface protector, but the rot is deep underground, just out of her reach. It was during this time that she identified the head of the snake. It wasn't the guildmaster. Mercy, nobody even knew who the guildmaster was half the time. It was the patron, Maven Blackbriar. Maven is the unspoken Jarl of Riften. She controls the Meadery, the guards, and the Dark Brotherhood contacts. Mjoll watched Maven glide through the streets, people parting before her like fish before a shark. Mjoll saw the arrogance, and she realised that clearing a dungeon was easy compared to this. In a dungeon, you kill the boss, loot the chest, and leave. Here, the boss was the law, the boss owned the chest, and there was nowhere to leave to. The Lioness nickname took on a new meaning in this era. A lioness protects the pride. She patrols the territory. Mjoll adopted the people of Riften as her cubs. The shopkeepers, the beggars, the workers at the fishery. They were weak, and she was strong. It gave her a reason to wake up in the morning that didn't involve mourning her lost sword. But let's not romanticize it too much. Mjoll was also bored. You can hear it in her voice when you first meet her. She yearns for the old days. She tells stories to anyone who will listen, mostly Aerin, who nods enthusiastically at tales he's heard 1,000 times. She's a warrior in retirement, pacing the cage, waiting for someone to open the door. She was waiting for a catalyst. She was waiting for someone who didn't fear the guild, didn't bow to Maven, and didn't mind getting their hands dirty in the ruins of the past. She was waiting for you, the player, but she didn't know it yet. For now, she was just Mjoll the Lioness, the crazy lady who yells at the clouds in the marketplace, the woman with the sad eyes and the loyal shadow-like companion, the woman who looked at the misty peaks of the mountains and felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs and everything to do with a glass sword rusting in the dark. The recovery was complete, physically, but the warrior was still in stasis. She was a coiled spring rusting in the damp air of the rift, waiting for the tension to break. And as the leaves fell in the eternal autumn of the city, Mjoll tightened the straps of her armour and prepared for another day of staring down the abyss. The war for the soul of Riften is not fought on a battlefield. There are no catapults lining the shores of Lake Honric, no shield walls clashing in the birch forests. It is a war fought in the grey spaces, in the whispers exchanged over mugs of watered-down ale, in the weight of a coin purse passing from a gloved hand to a guard's palm, and in the heavy, judgmental silence of a woman standing in the centre of the marketplace. Mjoll's recovery had transformed her. She was no longer the bedridden invalid watching the corruption from a window. She was now the active antibody in the city's infected bloodstream. But this wasn't the clean, kinetic violence of Mzinchaleft. You can't swing a greatsword at corruption. You can't decapitate bribery. Mjoll found herself in a conflict that her warrior training hadn't prepared her for. A political stalemate against the most powerful woman in the Rift, Maven Blackbriar. If Mjoll is the lioness, bold and loud, Maven is the viper. She's the matriarch of the Blackbriar family, the owner of the meadery that fuels the province's alcoholism, and the de facto ruler of the city, regardless of who sits on the Jarl's throne. Maven doesn't shout. She doesn't need to. She speaks in implications. She wears fine clothes and sits in the Bee and Barb or Mistvale Keep, radiating an aura of untouchable menace. The dynamic between Mjoll and Maven is one of the most fascinating unscripted dramas in Skyrim. Mjoll is openly vocal about her disdain for the Blackbriars. She tells anyone who will listen, including the Dragonborn, that the family is the root of the city's rot. She accuses them of being in bed with the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, and she is absolutely right. This brings us to a core in-game fact that players can discover if they have a knack for breaking and entering. If you sneak into the basement of Blackbriar Manor, behind a master-level locked door, you will find a scene that chills the blood, the Black Sacrament. This is the ritual used to contact the Dark Brotherhood to arrange an assassination. We also find letters confirming Maven's close ties to the Guild and the Empire. Mjoll isn't just spreading conspiracy theories, she's shouting the truth. And in a city built on lies, the truth is treason. So here is the question that plagues the lore community. Why is Mjoll still alive? This is a massive subject of community debate. Maven Blackbriar is a woman who has people killed for looking at her wrong. She has the Dark Brotherhood on speed dial. She has the Thieves Guild to frame her enemies. She has the Jarl in her pocket. Mjoll stands in the public square daily, loudly proclaiming that Maven is a criminal. By all logic, Mjoll should have accidentally fallen into the canal with a dagger in her back weeks ago. There are two prevailing theories on this. The first is the martyr theory. Mjoll is well liked by the common folk. She champions their causes. If Maven were to have her killed, it might turn the lioness into a saint, sparking a riot that would be bad for business. Meaderies don't run efficiently when the workers are burning down the warehouse. The second, and perhaps more interesting theory, is the utility theory. Mjoll, for all her bluster, is actually useful to Maven. How? Because Mjoll focuses on street-level crime. She scares away the freelance bandits, the petty pickpockets, and the drug pushers who aren't paying their dues to the guild. In a twisted way, Mjoll acts as an unpaid enforcer of order, keeping the streets safe enough for commerce, which ultimately benefits the Blackbriars. She is the sheepdog that keeps the wolves away, unaware that the farmer owns the wolves. This stalemate creates a thick, humid tension in the city. Mjoll patrols the plank walkways, her heavy steel boots thudding a rhythm of defiance. The Thieves Guild operatives, Brynjolf, Vex, Dirge, watch her from the shadows of the Ratway entrance. They don't engage her. They know she's a tank. Brynjolf, the smooth-talking second-in-command, is often seen in the market peddling his Falmer blood elixir. Mjoll stands nearby, arms crossed, scowling. It's a silent duel. Brynjolf's charisma against Mjoll's integrity. He sells the lie. She represents the hard, uncomfortable truth. The tragedy for Mjoll is that she is losing, and she knows it. She can stop a mugging, but she can't stop the flow of Blackbriar mead. She can intimidate a guard into doing his job for 10 minutes, but the moment she turns a corner, the coin changes hands again. She is fighting a hydra with a fly swatter. We also have to consider the guard's dialogue. This is a common interaction that highlights her isolation. Mjoll will often say, "The guards in this city are all on the take. They don't care about the people, only the gold." This isn't just flavour text, it's a mechanic. In Riften, guards will often look the other way if you commit a crime, provided you're a member of the guild. Mjoll is the only entity in the city who provides aggro to criminals. She essentially functions as a one-woman police force, unrecognised by the state. But there is an obscure lore tidbit that suggests Mjoll's crusade might have deeper roots than just crime is bad. In the lore, the Nords value honour and the old ways. The corruption in Riften is often linked to imperial influence, the East Empire Company, the flow of coin from Cyrodiil. Maven is a staunch imperial supporter. Mjoll, while not explicitly a Stormcloak zealot, embodies the traditional Nord values of strength and honesty. Her conflict with Maven is a microcosm of the Civil War itself, the rugged, honest, but perhaps naive Nord tradition clashing against the sophisticated, wealthy and corrupt imperial machine. However, Mjoll's war is lonely. Aside from Aerin, who trails her like a shadow, she has no allies. The Jarl, Layla Lawgiver, is portrayed as either incompetent or willfully, ignorant, manipulated by her advisors who are, you guessed it, on Maven's payroll. Mjoll has tried to speak to the Jarl. She mentions having audiences where she's nodded at and dismissed. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of being patted on the head. This isolation wears on her. You can hear it in her voice when the sun goes down. The fire in her belly is still there, but it's fueled by frustration now. She paces. She looks at the entrance to the Ratway, the sewer tunnels where the guild hides, and you can see the calculation in her eyes. She wants to go down there. She wants to descend into the dark again, just like she did in Mzinchaleft. She wants to cut the head off the snake, but she doesn't. Why? Perhaps it's the memory of the centurion. The Ratway is a warren of tunnels, traps and ambushes. It is physically very similar to a dungeon. Going down there alone would be suicide, and this time there might not be an Aerin to drag her out. The trauma of Mzinchaleft acts as an invisible leash. It keeps her on the surface, in the light, where she is safe but ineffective. She's a lioness in a zoo, roaring at the visitors but unable to hunt. The standoff with the Blackbriars also highlights Mjoll's moral rigidity. In a world of grey morality, she is starkly black and white. She doesn't understand compromise. This makes her admirable, but it also makes her rigid. She cannot play the political game because she refuses to learn the rules. Maven wins because Maven cheats. Mjoll loses because she insists on a fair fight in a city that doesn't know the meaning of the word. Imagine the daily humiliation. Mjoll walks into the Bee and Barb to warm up by the fire. Maven is there, holding court at the best table. The music stops. The patrons look down at their drinks. Maven takes a sip of her mead, looks Mjoll up and down with eyes like chips of flint and smiles, a cold, thin smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Mjoll grips the hilt of her generic steel sword, the replacement, the imposter blade, until her knuckles turn white. Then she turns and leaves. It's not a battle of steel, it's a battle of presence, and while Mjoll occupies space, Maven occupies minds. This was the state of affairs for months, perhaps years. A frozen conflict, the unstoppable force, Mjoll, meeting the immovable object, the Blackbriar Thieves Guild alliance. Mjoll was slowly becoming a caricature of herself, the local eccentric, the crazy lady who hates thieves. Her legend was fading. The stories of her adventuring days were becoming just that, stories. The reality was a woman shouting at stone walls. She needed a breaker. She needed an element of chaos to enter the system and disrupt the equilibrium. She needed someone who walked the line between hero and monster, someone who could navigate the grey areas she refused to touch. And then, one day, the gates of Riften opened. The guards didn't stop this newcomer to ask for the visitor's tax, the shakedown. Or perhaps they tried and regretted it. A figure walked in, clad in mismatched armour, smelling of dragon ash and ancient dust. The Dragonborn had arrived. For Mjoll, spotting the Dragonborn must have been a revelation. Here was someone who moved like she used to move, someone who carried themselves with the weight of destiny. When she first hails the player, her dialogue is desperate. She doesn't just say hello, she launches into her manifesto. I'm Mjoll the Lioness. I've walked the width and breadth of Skyrim. It's an interview. She is auditioning you. She's looking for a partner, or perhaps a successor. She sees the weapons on your back, maybe even a Daedric artifact or a glass blade that reminds her of Grimsever, and she feels a spark of hope that she hasn't felt since the doors of Mzinchaleft slammed shut behind her. The arrival of the protagonist is the turning point in Mjoll's stagnant war. It represents the possibility of action, finally someone who might listen, finally someone who might be strong enough to help her break the stalemate, but hope is a dangerous thing in Riften. it makes you vulnerable. As Mjoll watched the Dragonborn navigate the market, talking to Brynjolf, talking to Maven, she must have held her breath. Which way would this demigod fall? Would they become the saviour of the city? Or would they become the new guild master? Little did she know the Dragonborn would be the key to unlocking not just the city's chains, but the chains around her own heart. The path back to Mzinchaleft was about to be reopened. The ghost of Grimsever was calling, and this time the Lioness wouldn't have to answer it alone. The arrival of a hero in a place like Riften is like throwing a torch into a room full of moths. It disturbs the stagnation. It creates shadows that dance wildly against the walls. For Mjoll, who had spent months or perhaps years standing as a static sentinel in the marketplace, the day the Dragonborn walked through the North Gate was the day the clock started ticking again. We need to visualize this from her perspective. Mjoll is observant. She watches the flow of the crowd. Most travellers enter Riften with their heads down, clutching their coin purses, terrified of the guards and the thieves alike. But the Dragonborn usually enters with a chaotic, terrifying confidence. Maybe they sprint past the guards without paying the visitors' tax. Maybe they are wearing the skin of a dragon they slew just outside the walls. Maybe they are jumping on top of the market stalls for no discernible reason other than to test the physics engine. To Mjoll, this chaotic energy must have been magnetic. She recognises the look. It's the look of someone who lives by the sword and sleeps in the dirt. It's the look she sees in the mirror when she washes the war paint off at night. This brings us to a core in-game fact that dictates this interaction. Mjoll will not discuss her lost sword with you immediately. You cannot just walk up to her at level 1 and ask for the quest. The game imposes a strict condition. You must be at least level 14. This is a brilliant piece of mechanical storytelling. Why level 14? Because Mjoll's a veteran. She knows the dangers of the world. She isn't going to send a novice, a milk drinker, into a Dwemer ruin. She needs to see that you have survived a bit. She needs to see the wear on your armour and the quality of your weapons. She waits until you have proven, simply by existing at that level of power, that you're capable of surviving the thing that nearly killed her. When she finally approaches you, or you approach her, the conversation is a fascinating dance of assessment. She starts with the standard greeting we've all heard 100 times. I am Mjoll the Lioness. I've walked the width and breadth of Skyrim. It sounds like a resume. She's listing her credentials, establishing that she is your peer, not a quest-giver NPC to be trifled with. She tells you about her travels, about the cliff races, about her father. She's building a rapport, but then the mask slips. If you gain her favour, usually by agreeing that the Thieves Guild is trash or by simply listening to her monologue, she drops the Lioness persona and reveals the wounded woman underneath. She mentions Grimsever. It was a fine blade, she says, her voice dropping an octave. I lost it in a Dwemer ruin, Mzinchaleft. This is the moment of the fated intervention. Mjoll is essentially handing you the key to her soul. She's outsourcing her closure. She admits, with a rare and painful honesty, I think I could have retrieved it, but the memory of that place, I just can't bring myself to go back. This admission is huge. Nords in Skyrim are a prideful bunch. They would rather die than admit fear. For Mjoll to tell a stranger that she is afraid to return to a dungeon speaks to the severity of her trauma. She isn't asking you to find a lost ring or deliver a letter. She's asking you to go into the nightmare that broke her and retrieve the piece of herself she left behind. The Dragonborn's acceptance of this task is the turning point in Mjoll's narrative. Up until this moment, she has been stuck in a loop of impotent anger. By accepting the quest, Grimsever's return, the player breaks the loop. However, this interaction creates one of the most glaring and hilarious community debates in the entire game: the Thieves Guild paradox. As we know, the Dragonborn is often a chaotic neutral loot goblin who joins every faction possible. It is entirely possible and quite common for the player to be the guild master of the Thieves Guild, wearing the nightingale armour, pockets full of stolen goods, when they accept Mjoll's quest. Mjoll, who has spent every waking hour ranting about how much she hates the Thieves Guild, seems completely oblivious to this. She will look a Dragonborn wearing the guild master's hood dead in the eye and say, I'm glad to see someone who dislikes the guild as much as I do. Is she blind? Is she stupid? Or is this a case of gameplay and story segregation? The more charitable lore interpretation is that of willful ignorance. Mjoll wants Grimsever back more than she wants to be right. She is willing to overlook the obvious signs of your criminal affiliation because she is desperate. You are her only hope. If the devil himself walked into Riften and offered to get her sword back, she might just say yes. It adds a layer of tragic compromise to her character. She hates the corruption of Riften, yet she hires a mercenary who might be the king of thieves to solve her personal problem. It implies that her attachment to the sword overrides her moral compass when push comes to shove. There is also the presence of Aerin during this exchange. He is always there, hovering over her shoulder. If you watch closely during the dialogue, Aerin often cycles through his idle animations, looking at Mjoll, looking at you, checking his surroundings. The arrival of the Dragonborn is a threat to him. For years he has been Mjoll's saviour, her rock. Now, a real hero has arrived, a hero who can do the one thing Aerin couldn't, fight the centurion. There is a subtle tragedy in Aerin watching this deal go down. He knows he can't retrieve the sword. He knows he isn't strong enough. He has to stand there and watch the woman he loves ask a stranger to do the job that should be his. It's the moment he realises that he is a placeholder in her life, a bandage on a wound that requires a surgeon. The Dragonborn's intervention also highlights the concept of disposition in the Elder Scrolls. This is an obscure lore tidbit regarding the game's mechanics that reflects a deeper social reality. In Oblivion, there was a persuasion minigame to make people like you. In Skyrim, disposition is raised by doing favours. By agreeing to find Grimsever, you're engaging in a social contract. You are buying Mjoll's loyalty with violence. It's a very Nordic transaction. Words are wind, deeds are steel. Mjoll doesn't trust you because you're charismatic. She trusts you because you're willing to bleed for her. The conversation usually ends with Mjoll marking Mzinchaleft on your map. Be careful, she warns. The ruin is old and full of dangers. She doesn't explicitly mention the centurion. She doesn't warn you about the specific boss fight. Maybe she assumes you can handle it. Or maybe, subconsciously, she doesn't want to scare you off. She needs you to go. She needs the sword back. As the Dragonborn turns to leave, perhaps heading toward the city gates to begin the journey to the Pale, Mjoll is left in a state of agonizing suspension. The hope has been reignited, but so has the anxiety. What if you don't come back? What if you die down there, just like she almost did? Then Grimsever claims another victim. The ruin wins again. She likely spends the next few days in a state of high agitation. She paces the market with even more ferocity. She snaps at Aerin. She stares at the mountain peaks to the north, imagining the Dragonborn descending into the steam and the dark. For the player, this is just another questlog update. Retrieve Grimsever. We fast travel, we loot, we clear. But for the story we are telling tonight, this is the climax of Mjoll's waiting. She has cast her lot. She has placed her past in the hands of a chaotic demigod who eats 40 cheese wheels in a single sitting. The fated intervention is not just about the sword, it's about Mjoll acknowledging that she cannot do it alone. It is the first crack in her armour of independence. She needs help. And in the harsh, cold world of Skyrim, admitting you need help is the bravest thing a warrior can do. So the Dragonborn leaves Riften. The heavy wooden gates close behind them. Mjoll is left with her memories and her phantom limb pain. The die is cast. The Lioness waits. And deep in the earth, in the cold metal grip of Mzinchaleft, Grimsever waits too, humming softly in the dark, sensing the approach of a new master. While Mjoll paced the wooden planks of Riften, staring at the southern horizon with a mixture of hope and nausea, the Dragonborn was trudging through the knee-deep snow of the Pale. The journey to retrieve Grimsever is not merely a fetch quest. It is a pilgrimage into someone else's nightmare. It is a proxy war. The Dragonborn is essentially acting as a remote-controlled avatar of Mjoll's vengeance, stepping into the ring to finish a fight that was started years ago. The return to Mzinchaleft is a stark reminder of how indifferent the world of Skyrim is to human suffering. The ruin hasn't changed. The steam still vents from the brass pipes jutting out of the ice. The wind still howls through the ancient grating. The bandits that usually camp near the entrance might be different individuals, respawned fodder for the levelling mill, but they serve the same function, a warning sign that is inevitably ignored. As the Dragonborn pushes open those heavy bronze doors, descending into the humid interior, there is a distinct shift in power dynamic compared to Mjoll's original journey. Mjoll went in as an explorer, pushing her limits. The Dragonborn goes in as an exterminator. By the time a player usually accepts this quest, level 14 or higher, they have likely shouted a dragon out of the sky or joined the companions. They're a walking arsenal of enchanted gear and cheese wheels. Mzinchaleft isn't a tomb to them, it's a loot pinata. This brings us to a core in-game fact that fundamentally alters the narrative of this return trip: level scaling. In Skyrim, the world levels with you to a degree. When Mjoll entered Mzinchaleft years ago, the ruin was a static challenge that exceeded her capabilities. But when the Dragonborn enters, the ruin mathematically adjusts to provide a fair challenge. The dwarven spiders are just sturdy enough to be annoying, the spheres are dangerous but manageable, the universe is literally conspiring to make sure the Dragonborn succeeds where the Lioness failed. Navigating the corridors, the Dragonborn walks over the same ground where Mjoll bled. They pass the spot where she likely camped. They step over the scrap heaps of the automaton she destroyed. There is a ghostly resonance to the exploration. If you are role-playing a character with high perception or perhaps a restoration mage, you might imagine sensing the echoes of that desperate battle. The scratches on the wall from a glass greatsword. The dent in a pipe where a Nord was thrown against it. The combat encounters on this proxy run serve as a dark mirror to Mjoll's story. Where Mjoll struggled against the swarms of Falmer, the Dragonborn likely utilises the stealth archer archetype. Let's be honest, we all end up there eventually. Crouching in the shadows, picking off the blind, betrayed with a bound bow or a dwarven crossbow, it turns the frantic, terrifying melee that broke Mjoll's body into a clinical silent cleanup operation. The Falmer don't even know they are dying until the arrow is already in their chest. It's efficient, cold, and devoid of the glory Mjoll sought, but it gets the job done. However, the ruin still has teeth. Mzinchaleft is a long dungeon. It wears down your inventory space, if not your health bar. The constant weight of Dwemer struts and bent Dwemer scrap metal, because we all have that hoarding instinct that says, I might need this to build a turret later, slows the pace. But the Dragonborn presses on, driven by the quest marker hovering on their compass. That little white arrow is the only guidance Mjoll never had. She was wandering in the dark. The Dragonborn is following a GPS to the objective. Finally, the Dragonborn reaches the gate, the same gate Mjoll opened. The lever is pulled, the gears grind, the arena is revealed, the centurion is there. It might be the same one. Or perhaps, given the Dwemer's automated repair systems, it is a rebuilt version, a centurion master or centurion guardian depending on your level. It stands in its docking station, steam venting from its pauldrons, a silent sentinel of the deep. This leads to a community debate regarding the nature of respawning enemies in lore versus gameplay. In gameplay, enemies respawn every 10 to 30 in-game days. In lore, however, a centurion is a unique, expensive piece of hardware. It is unlikely the Dwemer built infinite backups, so from a narrative perspective this is the centurion. The one that crushed the Lioness, the one that has been standing there for years, waiting for round 2. The fight that ensues is the catharsis Mjoll never got, but it is also, quite frankly, often a display of the Dragonborn's sheer absurdity. Mjoll fought with honour and steel. The Dragonborn? The Dragonborn might summon a Dwemer lord to tank the damage while they eat 10 cabbages in a paused menu screen, or they might use the Fus Rodar shout to stagger the giant, a power Mjoll could only dream of. But let's look at the mechanics of the Centurion fight through a lore lens. The Centurion is slow, its attacks are telegraphed. Mjoll lost because she was overwhelmed and exhausted. The Dragonborn wins because they exploit the AI. They kite the Centurion around the pillars. They use the environment. It's a victory of tactics over brute force. There is a specific satisfaction in taking down the monster that bullied your friend. As the Dragonborn lands the final blow, perhaps a kill cam execution, where they climb onto the Centurion's chest and drive a blade into its steam vents, it feels like a receipt is being paid. The giant shudders. The red lights in its eyes flicker and die. With a sound like a collapsing building, the Centurion falls to its knees and crashes face first into the stone floor. Silence returns to the chamber. The steam clears. The threat is neutralized. Now comes the looting. And this is where we find a fascinating obscure lore tidbit. On the body of a dwarven Centurion, you will almost always find a Centurion dynamo core. It's a spinning red energized gyro. In the Elder Scrolls Online and deeper lore texts, it is suggested that these cores are not just batteries. They are complex tonal architecture devices that might even contain the soul gem heart of the machine. By taking it, the Dragonborn is literally ripping the heart out of the beast. It's a trophy, a glowing, humming proof of death. But the real prize isn't on the body. The Dragonborn turns their attention to the room. The quest marker points to a specific spot, usually resting on a table or lying on the floor near the back of the room. Grimsever. Seeing the sword in the game is always a bit underwhelming at first glance. It's a standard glass greatsword model. It doesn't glow with a unique particle effect. It doesn't float. It's just a sword, lying in the dust. But the context gives it weight. This is the object that has defined Mjoll's life for years. This is the Excalibur of Riften. The Dragonborn walks over to it. The act of picking it up is significant. In the game, you press a button, a sound effect plays, and the item is added to your inventory. Grimsever added. But in the narrative, the Dragonborn is lifting a curse. The moment the sword leaves the floor of Mzinchaleft, Mjoll's failure is erased. The timeline is corrected. The weapon is heavy. Glass weapons are lighter than steel, but Grimsever carries the weight of history. It is cold to the touch, having sat in the freezing, damp underground for so long. The blade is likely coated in grime and old oil, its teal brilliance dulled by neglect. It needs a master. It needs to be held. The Dragonborn might give it a few test swings. It balances perfectly. It's a masterwork weapon. One can see why Mjoll loved it. It shears through the air with a distinct hum, a singing quality that gave the sword its reputation. With the sword secured, the mission is technically over, but getting out is the final step. The Dragonborn doesn't have to be dragged out by a civilian like Aerin. They likely take the convenient exit elevator located just behind the boss room. This is a staple of Skyrim dungeon design, the back door that leads you right back to the start. Riding that lift to the surface, watching the stone walls rush by, the Dragonborn is carrying a package that will change the political landscape of Riften. They are carrying Mjoll's confidence. The transition from the depths to the surface is jarring. Emerging into the crisp air of the Pale, the Dragonborn stands where Aerin once stood, shivering and terrified, but the Dragonborn stands victorious. The sun reflects off the glass blade strapped to their back. There is a dark humour in the inventory management aspect here. To the Dragonborn, Grimsever is just one of 20 swords they are carrying to sell to a merchant. They might have Daedric weapons that deal double the damage. They might have a legendary mace given to them by Molag Bal. Grimsever statistically is mid-tier loot, but the player knows, and the lore knows, that its value isn't in its damage per second. Its value is in the smile it will put on the face of the saddest woman in Riften. The journey back to the city is a victory lap. The Dragonborn can fast travel, effectively teleporting across the map, skipping the arduous trek that broke Mjoll's spirit. It highlights the disparity between the NPC and the protagonist. Mjoll lives in a world of travel time, fatigue, and permanent consequences. The Dragonborn lives in a world of loading screens and quick saves. As the Dragonborn materialises at the Riften stables, or walks through the main gate, the guards might comment on their armour or the sweet roll theft, completely unaware that the hero is carrying the lost legacy of the Lioness. The city is the same as they left it. The fog is still thick. The thieves are still skulking. But the variable has changed. Mjoll is likely where she always is, leaning against the railing near the Bee and Barb or patrolling the market. She doesn't know yet. She doesn't have a quest marker telling her objective complete. She is still in the quantum state of anxiety, waiting to see if you return as a corpse or a champion. The Dragonborn navigates the crowd. Brynjolf might try to sell them a former blood elixir again. A guard might grumble about an arrow to the knee, but the Dragonborn ignores them. They have a delivery to make. This journey, the proxy run, is the bridge between Mjoll's tragic past and her potential future. It was a journey she couldn't make, not because she lacked the strength, but because she lacked the detachment. The Dragonborn succeeded because to them, Mzinchaleft was just a job. To Mjoll, it was a graveyard. Sometimes, to clear a haunted house, you need someone who doesn't believe in ghosts. And now, standing a few feet away from the Lioness, the Dragonborn reaches into their inventory. The moment of reunion is at hand. The cold touch of glass is about to meet the warm hand of the warrior who thought she would never hold it again. The meeting takes place, as most things in Riften do, amidst the noise and the grime. Mjoll is usually standing near the market stalls, watching Grelka shout at customers or keeping an eye on the Branche stand. She is in her patrol mode, arms crossed, posture rigid. But if you look closely, and the game's facial animation technology tries its best to convey this, there is a tightness around her eyes. She's distracted. She's waiting for news from the north. When the Dragonborn approaches, the air shifts. You can imagine the scene. The protagonist, covered in road dust and perhaps the lingering soot of a Dwemer machine, walks directly toward the Lioness. They don't say a word at first. They simply reach over their shoulder, unclasp the leather strap and pull the massive teal blade from its scabbard. The sound of a glass greatsword being drawn is distinct. It's a high, ringing chime, like a crystal goblet being struck by a silver spoon, but amplified and deadly. It cuts through the ambient noise of the market, the haggling, the hammering of the blacksmith, the distant coughing of the beggars. Grimsever catches the light. Even under the overcast sky of the rift, the malachite blade glows. It is a shard of frozen magic. Mjoll freezes, her arms drop to her sides. The scowl vanishes, replaced by a look of utter, devastating vulnerability. For a moment, she isn't the protector of the city. She isn't the scourge of the Thieves Guild. She is just a person seeing a ghost. "You found it," she whispers. The line is delivered with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. "I can't believe it. Grimsever." The handover is the emotional climax of her arc. The Dragonborn holds the weapon out, hilt first. It is an offering, a restoration of honour. As Mjoll reaches out to take it, we need to focus on the sensory details of the moment. Her hands are calloused, scarred from years of combat. She hesitates for a fraction of a second, perhaps fearing that it's an illusion, or that the sword will reject her, but then her fingers close around the leather-wrapped grip. The cold touch of the glass pommel against her palm acts as a grounding wire. It reconnects the circuit that was broken in Mzinchaleft. You can almost see the jolt of electricity run up her arms and settle in her shoulders. The weight of the sword, heavy, balanced, lethal, is familiar. It's a weight she has carried for thousands of miles. It's the missing piece of her skeleton. This brings us to a core in-game fact regarding the item itself. Grimsever is enchanted. It deals frost damage. When Mjoll grasps it, there would be a literal drop in temperature around her. Frost would creep up the blade, misting in the humid air of Riften. This enchantment is significant. Mjoll is a Nord. She has a natural resistance to frost. The sword's cold doesn't hurt her. It comforts her. It reminds her of home, of the Pale, of the life she led before the heat of the forge, and the politics of the city trapped her. She lifts the blade, testing the balance. It swings effortlessly in her hands. The phantom limb pain she has felt for years vanishes instantly, replaced by the solid reality of the weapon. She looks at her reflection in the flat of the teal blade. She sees the war paint, she sees the scars, but she also sees the fire returning to her eyes. "To think I'd see this blade again," she says, her voice gaining strength. "It's like a part of me has returned." This moment is often analysed by the community for its mechanical oddities. Here is the infamous Grimsever glitch, or AI quirk. In the unmodded version of Skyrim, after you give Mjoll the sword, she adds it to her inventory, and often proceeds to not equip it immediately. She keeps using her default steel greatsword or whatever she had equipped. Players often have to recruit her as a follower and manually take away her other weapons to force her to use Grimsever. From a lore perspective, we can interpret this hesitation not as a bug, but as reverence. She has the sword back, but maybe she feels she needs to re-earn the right to wield it. Or perhaps she's afraid of damaging it again. She holds it close, treating it like a holy relic rather than a tool. It's a touching, accidental bit of storytelling. She possesses the symbol of her power, but she isn't quite ready to unleash it on a random thief just yet. But there is another figure in this scene who deserves our attention: Aerin. Aerin stands just behind Mjoll, as always. He watches the exchange with a complex expression. On one hand, he is relieved. Mjoll is happy. The shadow that has hung over her for years is lifted. But on the other hand, he sees the way she looks at the sword, and the way she looks at the Dragonborn. It is a look of respect, of partnership, of shared warrior ethos. It is a look she has never given him. Aerin knows in that moment that he has lost her. He saved her life, yes. He nursed her back to health. He gave her a home, but he could never give her back her soul. Only another warrior could do that. The return of Grimsever marks the end of Mjoll's dependence on Aerin. She's whole again. She doesn't need a caretaker anymore. She needs a shield sibling. This leads to the disposition shift. Once the sword is in her inventory, Mjoll's dialogue changes. She becomes a potential follower. She becomes a potential candidate for marriage. This is the mechanical representation of her walls coming down. By retrieving the sword, the Dragonborn has proven themselves to be worthy. Mjoll is a woman who values strength and loyalty above all else. You demonstrated both. You have my thanks, she tells you, and my blade, should you ever need it. This offer is not made lightly. Mjoll is one of the strongest followers in the game. She levels indefinitely with the player, up to a high cap. She has high health, and she is essential. When she pledges her blade to you, she's offering to walk back into the fire. She's saying that she's ready to leave Riften. She's ready to face the darkness again, provided you're standing beside her. Let's touch on an obscure lore tidbit regarding the cultural significance of naming weapons. In Nord culture, a weapon with a name has a legend. It is believed that the deeds performed with the weapon are recorded in the metal itself. By reclaiming Grimsever, Mjoll isn't just getting a +20 frost damage sword, she is reclaiming her resume. All the monsters she slew, all the bandits she stopped, those victories are stored in that glass. Without it, she was just a storyteller. With it, she is the living proof of the story. The reaction of the crowd around them is also telling. The citizens of Riften, the honest ones like Balamund and Medici, likely smile. They see the Lioness armed again. They know that the streets just got a little safer, but the Thieves Guild operatives, Brynjolf, watching from a distance, probably narrows his eyes. He knows what Grimsever represents. It represents an escalation. The crazy lady isn't just shouting anymore. She's armed with a weapon that can cut through Dwemer alloy. The balance of power in the market has shifted. Mjoll sheathes the sword. The sound of the glass sliding into leather is a definitive thwack. It's the sound of a book closing on a tragic chapter and opening a new one. She stands taller, her shoulders square up. The limp, if she had one, disappears. She turns to the Dragonborn and for the first time she smiles, a real genuine smile that reaches her eyes. If you ever need someone to watch your back, she says, you know where to find me. It's a subtle invitation. She isn't begging to leave. She's too proud for that. But she's letting you know that the cage door is open. She's ready to hunt again. There is a community debate about whether Mjoll is better off staying in Riften or travelling with the Dragonborn. Some argue that Riften needs her. Without her, the corruption is unchecked. Others argue that she's wasted in Riften, screaming into the void. By taking her with you, you allow her to fulfill her destiny as a hero of the realm, fighting dragons and saving the world, rather than yelling at pickpockets. Reclaiming Grimsever settles this debate in Mjoll's heart. She realises that her world was too small. Standing there, feeling the weight of the sword on her back, she remembers the thrill of the road. She remembers the wind in the pale. She remembers the smell of adventure. Riften feels smaller now. The walls feel tighter. She looks at Aerin and there is a silent apology in her eyes. She knows that if she leaves, he cannot follow. Not where she is going. He is a creature of the city, of safety. She is a creature of the wild. The sword has reminded her of her taxonomy. The cold touch of glass isn't just about the temperature of the weapon, it's about the clarity it brings. Glass is transparent. It reveals the truth. And the truth is that Mjoll the Lioness was never meant to retire. She was just resting. She was just healing. As the Dragonborn walks away, leaving her to admire her reclaimed treasure, Mjoll draws the sword again, just a few inches, to check that it's real, to see the teal glow one more time. It's a private moment of joy. She's reunited with her oldest friend. The nightmare of Mzinchaleft is finally over. The centurion is dead, the sword is home, and the lioness is awake. The sun begins to set over Lake Honre, casting long shadows across the market. But Mjoll doesn't fear the dark anymore. She has her light. She has her Grimsever, and woe betide any thief who crosses her path tonight. When the Dragonborn asks Mjoll to follow them, the dynamic shifts from a political drama to a road trip movie. Lead on, she says, her voice thrumming with a renewed sense of purpose. And just like that, the lioness leaves her cage. She walks through the gates of Riften, not as a patrol officer, but as a sworn sword to the most dangerous individual on the planet. Recruiting Mjoll is often a strategic decision for the player, but from a narrative standpoint it is a liberation. She is trading the stagnation of the marketplace for the kinetic chaos of the open road. However, walking the path of the follower with Mjoll the Lioness is a unique experience in Skyrim, distinct from the robotic obedience of a housecarl like Lydia or the mercenary transactionalism of Janassa. Mjoll brings baggage, she brings opinions, and, quite famously, she brings a third wheel. Let's start with the tank archetype. In the meta of Skyrim gameplay, Mjoll is widely considered one of the best followers for a specific type of player, the squishy mage or the stealth archer. Why? Because Mjoll is a brick wall. This brings us to a core in-game fact that defines her utility. Mjoll specialises in heavy armour and two-handed weapons, and she is flagged as essential. This is the holy grail of follower traits. Most followers, even the tough ones, can die. If a giant plays golf with Faendal, Faendal is gone forever unless you reload a save. But Mjoll takes a knee. She pants, she catches her breath, and 10 seconds later she's back on her feet, swinging Grimsever with zero regard for her own safety. This immortality fundamentally changes how you play the game. You don't have to babysit her. You can cast Fireball into a crowded room, knowing that while Mjoll might complain about the friendly fire, she won't actually die from it. She is the ultimate aggro magnet. She charges in, screaming battle cries, drawing the attention of every bandit and draugr in the room, allowing the Dragonborn to stand back and peel them off at leisure. However, her combat style is enthusiastic. Mjoll is aggressive. She doesn't hang back. The moment a red dot appears on the compass, she is off. There is a primal joy in watching her work. She swings Grimsever in wide, clearing arcs. The physics of the game give two-handed weapons a stagger chance, meaning she often stun-locks enemies, interrupting their power attacks. She is a disruption machine. But having Mjoll as a companion isn't just about the combat stats, it's about the auditory experience. Mjoll is a talker. Most followers in Skyrim have generic lines. "I've got your back. Look at that cave." Mjoll, however, has a unique script of personal anecdotes that she cycles through while you travel. This is where the bedtime lore aspect really shines. Imagine walking along the roads of the Whiterun tundra under a starry sky. The music is soft, maybe Secunda, or The Streets of Whiterun is playing. And Mjoll breaks the silence with her signature storytelling voice. She talks about her childhood. "My father was a hunter from the Solstheim Skall." She talks about the dangers she's seen. "I've seen enough cliff races to last a lifetime." She talks about her philosophy. These aren't just barks, they are windows into her soul. She fills the empty space of the game world with her history. However, this leads to an amusing community debate, the repetitive story syndrome. Because the game's code only has a limited number of these stories, Mjoll will often repeat the same anecdote about her father or the cliff racers 5 times in a single dungeon. Players often joke about this. "Yes, Mjoll, we know about the cliff racers, you told me 10 minutes ago." But if we look at this through a lore lens rather than a programming limitation, it adds a layer of realism. Have you ever hung out with an old war veteran or a grandparent? They repeat stories. It's part of their charm. Mjoll is traumatized and nostalgic. She clings to these memories because they are the anchor points of her identity before Riften. She tells the story of the cliff racers not to inform you, but to remind herself that she survived them. There is also an obscure lore tidbit regarding her moral alignment. Mjoll is flagged in the game data with a high morality setting. Unlike mercenaries who will watch you murder an innocent shopkeeper without blinking, Mjoll has standards. In earlier patches of the game, or depending on specific mods, Mjoll would actually turn hostile if the Dragonborn committed a crime in front of her. She would prioritise her code over her loyalty to you. While this has been softened in later versions to prevent players from losing their tank because they accidentally stole a sweet roll, the narrative implication remains. Mjoll acts as a conscience. Travelling with her feels like travelling with a paladin. You feel a subconscious pressure to be good. You're less likely to pickpocket a beggar when the Lioness is watching. She elevates the tone of the playthrough, but we cannot discuss Mjoll as a follower without addressing the elephant in the room, the shadow, the glitched, devoted, terrifyingly persistent Aerin. This is one of the most famous and hilarious interactions in Skyrim. When you recruit Mjoll and fast travel to a new location, there is a non-zero chance that Aerin will appear. He isn't a follower. You didn't recruit him. But his AI package is so tethered to Mjoll's that he will literally run across the entire map to be near her. Imagine the scene. You and Mjoll are deep in a dangerous dungeon, perhaps exploring Blackreach. You have just slain a centurion. You're catching your breath, and suddenly, from the shadows, walks Aerin. He's wearing his fine clothes, he has a dagger, and he looks at Mjoll and says, "I've never seen anyone fight like that." It breaks the immersion in the funniest way possible, but it also reinforces the tragedy of their relationship. Aerin cannot let go. Even when she has chosen a new life, he tries to be a part of it. He is the moth flying into the flame of her new adventure. The community reaction to this is almost universally hostile. How do I get rid of Aerin? Is a common Google search. Players have devised elaborate ways to accidentally lead Aerin into a giant camp or a trap. It speaks to the possessiveness of the player. We want Mjoll to be our companion. We want to be the sole hero in her story. Aerin is a reminder of her past, a vestige of her vulnerability that we want to erase. But Mjoll never complains about him. She tolerates his presence. Perhaps she finds it comforting to have a piece of home following her, even if it is a bit stalkerish. Or perhaps she's just too polite to tell him to go home. When you take Mjoll back to her roots, dungeon delving, you see a change in her demeanour. She isn't afraid anymore. With Grimsever in hand, she approaches ruins with a professional curiosity. She will comment on the stonework. The Dwemer were masters of stone. She appreciates the architecture. This is the kinetic archaeologist coming out again. She isn't just a brute, she is an admirer of the world she fights. Her banter with the Dragonborn during combat is also distinct. She shouts, "Victory is yours," or "Is that the best you can do?" She's a cheerleader for violence. She feeds off the energy of the battle. It's a stark contrast to the depressive atmosphere of Riften. Out here, amidst the blood and the fire, Mjoll is happy. This happiness poses a difficult question for the player. Is it right to marry her? Mjoll is a marriage candidate once her quest is complete. Many players choose her because she is essential, strong, and has a nice voice. But marrying Mjoll means settling down. It usually involves moving her into one of your homes, Breezehome, Lakeview Manor, or Solitude. If you move her back into a domestic setting, are you just putting her in a different cage? If you leave her in Riften, she is miserable, but has a purpose. If you take her adventuring, she's happy but constantly in danger. If you marry her and put her in a house, she becomes a wife NPC, who opens a shop and gives you a home-cooked meal once a day. There is a melancholy in visiting a married Mjoll at your home. She stands in the kitchen, Grimsever likely mounted on a weapon rack or stored in a chest. She greets you warmly, calling you "my love." But you have to wonder if she misses the road. You have to wonder if, when you leave to save the world again, she looks at the door with that same longing she used to have in the Riften marketplace. And yes, if you marry her, Aerin often moves into your house too. He watches her sleep. He sits in the corner. It's the ultimate package deal. You marry the lioness, you get the cub. But the most canonical way to walk the path with Mjoll is to keep her by your side, to make her the shield brother she always wanted to be, to take her to Sovngarde, to take her to Solstheim to see the land of her ancestors, to let her face Alduin. When Mjoll is fighting a dragon, she is magnificent. She doesn't cower. She stands her ground against a creature the size of a longhouse, swinging her glass sword at its snout. In those moments, the trauma of Mzinchaleft is completely exorcised. She proves that a machine might have broken her body, but a dragon, the ultimate predator, cannot break her spirit. She serves as a reminder to the Dragonborn that they are not alone. The Chosen One narrative can be lonely. Everyone looks to you for salvation, but Mjoll looks to you for partnership. She doesn't need saving anymore. She is an equal. As the campfire crackles in the wilderness, and you set up camp for the night, assuming you're playing with survival mods or just role-playing, Mjoll is the one who takes the first watch. She sits by the fire, Grimsever across her lap, sharpening the blade with a rhythmic shh sound. She looks out into the dark, her eyes scanning for threats. She is at peace. She is doing what she was born to do. She is guarding the pack. The path of the follower is a path of service, and Mjoll serves with a dignity that shames the Jarls and the generals of Skyrim. She is the loyal heart of a disloyal land. And as long as the Dragonborn walks the earth, the Lioness will walk a step behind, ready to unleash the frost of Grimsever on anyone foolish enough to threaten her friend. We have journeyed from the bustling, corrupt marketplaces of Riften to the steam-choked depths of Mzinchaleft, and back again. We have seen the Lioness broken, and we have seen her rebuilt. Now, as the fire in the hearth burns low and the shadows in the room grow long, we must consider the final chapter of Mjoll's tale, the legacy of the warrior who finally found her peace. In the grand tapestry of Skyrim, where dragons eat souls and Daedric princes play games with mortals, Mjoll's story is intensely personal. She isn't trying to save the world from Alduin, unless you ask her to. She isn't trying to win the civil war. She's simply trying to save her own dignity and protect the few square miles of wooden planks she calls home. It is this grounded nature that makes her one of the most memorable characters in the game. She is the human element in a high fantasy equation. When the Dragonborn returns, Grimsever, Mjoll is effectively unlocked as a partner in life, not just in combat. This brings us to the final mechanical interaction, marriage. In Skyrim, marriage is often a transactional affair. You wear an amulet of Mara, you find someone who likes you, and you hold a ceremony. But marrying Mjoll carries a specific narrative weight. To marry her, you must first restore her. You cannot buy her affection with gold or persuade her with speech checks. You have to heal her trauma. This makes the bond feel earned in a way that marrying, say, a random merchant or a bard does not. If the Dragonborn chooses to propose, Mjoll's reaction is one of genuine surprise and warmth. The ceremony takes place in the Temple of Mara, right there in Riften. There is a poetic justice to this. The city she hates, the city of thieves and lies, becomes the site of her happiest memory. She reclaims the space. She stands at the altar, likely wearing her heavy armour because game mechanics rarely account for wedding dresses, and pledges her life to the hero who gave her back her sword. However, domestic life with Mjoll comes with a familiar lingering shadow. This is the final community debate we must address, the Aerin roommate situation. If you marry Mjoll and move her into your home, be it the cosy breeze home in Whiterun or the sprawling Proudspire Manor in Solitude, Aerin moves with her. It is a bug, a feature, or perhaps a curse, depending on your perspective. You will wake up in your marital bed, stretch, look across the room, and see Aerin sitting in a chair watching you. Many players find this infuriating. They want the fantasy of the power couple, the Dragonborn and the Lioness against the world. Aerin is the third wheel that refuses to roll away. But if we look at this with the empathy we've cultivated throughout this story, it makes perfect sense. Mjoll is loyal. Loyalty isn't a switch you flip off when you get married. Aerin saved her life. He gave her a home when she was broken. She isn't going to abandon him just because she found a new love. She drags him along into her new life because that is what a lioness does. She keeps the pack together, even the weaker members. There is a quiet tragedy to Aerin in this phase. He leaves his house in Riften, the only home he's ever known, to live in a stranger's house just to be near her. He walks around your home, commenting on the architecture, completely out of his element. He is a man who has accepted his place in the friend zone so completely that he has essentially become a piece of furniture in Mjoll's life. It's awkward, it's weird, but it is also a testament to the profound impact Mjoll has on people. She inspires devotion. Once settled, Mjoll takes on the role of the spouse. She opens a shop. "I've decided to open a small store to make some coin," she tells you. It's a hilarious image. The warrior who wields a glass greatsword haggling over the price of carrots. But it speaks to her desire for normalcy. After years of hunting monsters and shouting at thieves, Mjoll finds peace in the mundane. She cooks home-cooked meals, she gives you a share of the profits, and she rests. This is the core in-game fact that serves as a happy ending, the lover's comfort bonus. When you sleep in a bed with your spouse, you gain a bonus to skill learning. Narrative-wise, this implies a restful, safe sleep. For Mjoll, who spent years sleeping with one eye open, listening for the footsteps of assassins or the grinding of gears, this is the true treasure. To sleep soundly, to know that the person lying next to her is strong enough to hold back the dark. And what of Grimsever? In a domestic playthrough, Grimsever often ends up on a weapon rack. It hangs above the fireplace or stands on a mannequin in the armory. It is no longer a tool of desperate survival. It is a trophy, a relic. Mjoll can look at it every day and know that it is there, safe and sound. It becomes a symbol of a chapter closed. She doesn't need to carry it everywhere anymore because she isn't afraid of losing it. She knows where it is. But Mjoll never truly softens. Even in domesticity, she retains her edge. If a giant attacks your homestead, a common occurrence with the Hearthfire DLC, Mjoll is the first one out the door. She doesn't grab a broom, she grabs the glass blade. She defends her new territory with the same ferocity she used to defend the Rift. The difference is that now she is fighting for a home she chose, not one she was trapped in. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the dialogue files regarding Mjoll's opinion of the various hold capitals. She has specific comments for Solitude, Windhelm and Whiterun. She appreciates Solitude's order but dislikes the politics. She respects Windhelm's strength but hates the racism. She loves Whiterun's openness. This suggests that Mjoll was always searching for a Goldilocks zone, a place that was strong but kind, orderly but free. By moving her out of Riften, you're finally allowing her to find that place. You are correcting the geography of her life. Ultimately, Mjoll's legacy is one of resilience. She teaches us that you can be broken, you can lose the thing that defines you, and you can be humiliated by defeat, but you can also come back. You can heal. You can reclaim your sword. She represents the tank archetype, not just in physical stats, but in emotional durability. She took the hit. She took the crushing blow from the centurion, the years of pain, the mockery of the Thieves Guild, and the loss of her identity, and she didn't fold. She stood back up. She is the essential NPC of the human spirit. As we reach the end of our chronicle, imagine Mjoll now. Not standing in the cold market of Riften shouting at deaf ears, but sitting by a warm fire in a house built by the Dragonborn. Grimsever is gleaming on the wall, reflecting the dancing flames. Aerin is perhaps dozing in a chair in the corner. We'll let him stay, he's earned it. Mjoll is cleaning her armour, a content smile on her face. She looks up as you enter the room. She doesn't need to say anything. The bond is there. The shared history of the road, the ruin, and the recovery. She is the lioness who found her pride. She is the warrior who found her rest. And she is safe. Finally, truly safe. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft, pulsing light across the room. The tales of ancient ruins, of grinding gears and glass blades, are fading into the quiet hum of the night. The heavy iron armour has been unbuckled and set aside, the straps loosened, the weight lifted from weary shoulders. Outside, the wind of the rift might be howling, stripping the last golden leaves from the birch trees, or perhaps the snow of the Pale is falling in soft, silent blankets, covering the tracks of the day. But in here, the air is still. It is warm. The stone walls that once felt like a prison now feel like a fortress, holding back the cold and the noise of the world. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly, like the final hiss of steam from a cooling engine. Feel the tension leaving your muscles just as the tension left Mjoll when she finally grasped the hilt of her lost sword. The battles are over for now. The quests are completed. The map is put away. There is no need to patrol the market tonight. There is no need to listen for the footsteps of thieves or the ticking of machines. The guardians are at their posts. The lioness is sleeping soundly, her dreams free of falling darkness. You can let go of the controller. You can let go of the worry. Let the darkness of the room wrap around you like a heavy fur cloak. It is a safe darkness, a restful darkness. Sink into it. Let the story settle in your mind like dust settling in an ancient hall. The world of Skyrim will still be there tomorrow waiting for you. But for now, the screen fades to black. The music slows to a gentle whisper. Rest your head. Close your eyes. The journey is done. Sweet dreams.